Should a convicted serial killer ever be released from prison? It's a vexing question. Most people would say no, but even still, it's one Victorian authorities have to address. And it's all because of Paul Denyer. He's an awful man, evil beyond measure. In 1993, he randomly murdered 3 young women. When he was caught, he happily admitted his crimes, taking glee in the act of killing. But now, 30 years on, he's eligible for parole. Denyer's already applied for his freedom once and been rejected, but there's nothing to stop him trying again, unless the law is changed. "30 years ago, the streets of Frankston were under siege.
I've heard some people describe it as almost a lockdown, except it was like a lockdown for women. The whole town was terrified.
Under the cloak of darkness, this seaside Melbourne suburb was being stalked by a serial killer.
Murders happen every day, but serial murders, it's a phenomenon.
Over a period of 7 short weeks, 3 young women were picked out at random and murdered without mercy.
He hated women, and that's one of the reasons he killed them. He'd been fantasising about killing women since he was 14 years of age.
The killer was 21-year-old Paul Denyer, an unemployed Frankston local who would reveal himself to police as the embodiment of pure evil.
Grabbed her neck and pushed it up like that. Yeah. Fresh fall. Like something when I cut up times to the side.
Denyer's disturbing confessions were a brutal insight into the mind of a serial killer.
And I had blood all over here, all over my hands, on my arms, blood all over the place.
But perhaps even more confronting than the horror of his crimes was the blasé way he described them. Without the slightest flicker of emotion, he boasted of threatening his victims with a makeshift gun and slitting their throats with homemade knives.
Can you tell me where you attacked her on that night, on this night? What led to it?
Just that feeling, that's all.
What sort of feeling? Can you possibly describe where you had this feeling?
Just wanted to kill.
It's inconceivable to the families of Denyer's victims that 30 years on, the man who terrified Frankston could have any possibility of freedom. But the fact is, Paul Denyer is now eligible for parole. Outrage has galvanised the fight to keep him behind bars, led by Victorian MP David Limbrick.
That's what's driving us to talk about this. We don't want any possibility of him harming another girl.
Do you think he will get that opportunity? Do you think he'd ever be given
I don't know.
freedom?
I don't know. No one can say for certain, and that's the problem.
The fear is, given the chance, this monster will strike again.
What he was diagnosed with, what happened back then, what led him to kill, those elements are still present today.
Forensic psychologist Carla Ferrari has pored over the letters Denyer has written from the confines of his cell to help assess the mindset of this killer after 3 decades in jail. Is it an explanation for the savage murders he committed?
Absolutely not.
She sees no evidence of remorse or reform.
What he has been diagnosed with, there is no treatment for. Even with intensive treatment, treatment gains would probably be modest at best.
Are you seeing any gains in what you've read?
No.
Paul Denye's killing spree began on Friday, the 11th of June, 1993. On that evening, 18-year-old Elizabeth Stevens would become his first victim, going missing after getting off a bus to make the short walk home.
How did she get this location? That was the challenge for us.
Veteran detective Charlie Bazina led the investigation into her murder. What did Paul Denye do? What do we know what happened to Elizabeth that night?
He sees, not knowing who she was, sees Elizabeth get off the bus. It was a horrible night, it was raining. He then comes up from behind, holds a makeshift pistol that he made from a little barrel and a piece of wood, holds that to her and tells her to do not scream out or I'll kill you.
She doesn't scream.
And she didn't scream.
In the dark and the rain, driven by an urge to kill, Denye forces the 18-year-old to walk to a nearby park and to her death.
I started choking her with my hands, and she passed out after a while.
What happened then?
I pulled out a knife and stabbed her many times in the throat.
Right.
Denye's continued stabbing of Elizabeth long after she died was a telling clue to his sadistic nature.
Post-mortem, once she was dead, is when he inflicted a number of stab wounds to the upper body and then inflicted marks on the torso, like a big tic-tac-toe, noughts and crosses.
Right. So, noughts and crosses on her torso. Was this a game?
He just saw her as a piece of meat, and that's what's so chilling about this killer.
As with his other victims, there was no evidence of sexual assault. Denye's deadly impulse was driven by an inexplicable loathing of women.
Can you explain why we hate women, your victims? We hate them.
So after he's killed Elizabeth, Denye drags her down here and leaves her in this water.
She's lying there, and you spend some time looking at her, trying to recreate the scene in your own mind as an investigator.
At this point, you're investigating a single murder.
Yep. Initially, this is a single murder, and we treat it as such, nothing to indicate anything more sinister than that.
As horrific as the scene was, for homicide detectives, this was just another routine investigation. As they were to discover, they couldn't have been more wrong. They would soon be on the hunt for a serial killer. Those words, serial killer, it's terrifying.
It is. It sends chills down your spine. Here we had one in our midst, in our neighbourhood.
Darren Russell knows firsthand the savagery Paul Denye inflicted on those he murdered and is convinced he should never be allowed out of jail. A 30-year-old doctor at the time, he identified the body of one of Denye's 3 victims. Unimaginably, it was that of his own 17-year-old sister, Natalie. You have not spoken about this before, publicly. Do you feel a need to do that now?
It's important that we keep talking about this, that we keep it in the public's mind. He was an extremely callous, dangerous, and I don't use this word lightly, evil person. We've got no reason to believe that's changed.
I looked up behind her, grabbed her with the left hand, and out. I stuck a gun to her head. Yes. And I said, shut up, I'll blow your fucking head off.
Back in the winter of 1993, Paul Denye was only just getting started. He had the taste for blood and a compulsion to kill. 4 weeks after his first murder, he tried to grab a woman walking home from work. She managed to escape. If she hadn't fought so hard, if she hadn't run, what would have happened to her?
Well, she would have been deceased. No problem in the world.
But as homicide detective Charlie Bazina says, Paul Denye was intent on killing someone, anyone, that night.
because the urge was that strong. I need to kill, and today is the day I'm going to kill another woman. And he did.
If there was any doubt, his next murder would show just how cold-blooded and evil he truly is. New mum, Debbie Freem, had left her 12-day-old baby at home with a friend while she popped to the shops, driving to the milk bar just 650 metres from her home. In that moment, Denya sees his chance and takes it. Debbie had dug down here for a carton of milk. In the 1 minute she was in the shop, Denya, who had spotted her as she crossed the road, sneaked into the back of her unlocked car. As the young mum jumped in to make the short drive home, she had no idea of the monster so close, the monster just lying in wait.
She didn't see me in the back, truly. And I waited for her to start up the car so no one could hear her scream or anything.
Threatening her with his homemade gun, Denya forces her to drive right past her home and out into the back roads on the outskirts of Frankston. She wasn't just confronted with the torture of her own potential demise, but she was so close to home.
Yeah.
She was so close to her little baby son, who she must have been thinking, I will never see again. I mean, the torment that led up to her death.
It meant nothing to him. It's like looking into the eyes of a shark. There's nothing there. It's void. And this is what this person is.
And I lifted the cord up and I said, "Can you see this?" And she just put her hand up to grab it to feel it. And when she did that, I just yanked on it real quickly and round her neck.
Debbie's mutilated body was found by a farmer 4 days later, marking a frightening realisation for police and the people of Frankston.
We knew we had a serial killer amongst us, and that put really the pressure on us because serial killers just don't stop.
Darren Russell could never have imagined that his 17-year-old sister Natalie would be Denya's next and final victim. What are your happiest memories of your little sister?
Probably her kind of impish smile and sense of humour. She was a gentle, good soul with a good heart.
On Friday, the 30th of July, 1993, 3 weeks after the murder of Debbie Freem, Natalie took the track she used as a regular shortcut home.
Here's a 17-year-old girl that went to school who never made it home. And this is the first one that Denya planned. And it's in the middle of the afternoon.
As he told and showed police, Denya thought he'd calculated everything. He'd pre-cut holes in the fence to drag his victim away from prying eyes, only to return later, parking at the head of the track to lie in wait for a female, any female, to walk into his trap. But what Denya didn't know is he'd been spotted.
A postal worker happens to see a motor car with an individual seated in the driver's seat, slouched down. That was suspect enough. She then went to a house and made a call to the police.
Unaware police are now on their way, Denya sees Natalie Russell take the track as she heads home. He follows and quickly overtakes her and puts his despicable plan into action.
So he's hiding here, and what, Nat walks past.
And Nat walks past and he's looking out, sees her walk past and he puts himself out and comes walking behind her.
Did she see it?
And she turned around once and saw me. And I was stuck about 10 metres behind her until I got to the second hole up here. And just where I got to that hole, I walked up behind her and stuck my left hand around her mouth and held the knife to her throat.
I won't go into details, but the savagery of it was so significant that he must have been in a frenzy. He then goes out, walks back to the track to his motor car, but his hands are covered in blood. And in walking back, he tells us he sees 2 police officers at his motor car. What did you do? Cool as cool can be. I put my blood-soaked hands in my pocket and I walked past the police till they left. They left, I came back and I drove home. Chilling stuff.
Within a few hours of reporting Natalie missing, her family's worst fears were realised.
At 10:30 last night, searchers found a young woman's body in bushland just off a bike path a short distance from her home.
The police, I remember them, a couple of detectives coming in to pull me aside to let me know they'd found who they thought was Natalie, and she'd passed away. And then my job was to inform the rest of the family.
The discovery of Denya's car at the location of Natalie's murder finally delivered police a suspect.
And again, I'll warn you that you're not obliged to say or do anything unless you wish to, and anything you say or do may be given evidence. Detectives
swooped on Denya's home and hauled him in for questioning. The serial killer had been caught. Obviously, Natalie's death marked the end of Denya's hunting spree. How does that sit with you?
That was the only little source of light, that it was because of Natalie's death that Denya was caught. She did a good thing. Sorry.
That's okay. Why does that aspect of it upset you?
It's upsetting because there's the evil that he did, and there's kind of the good that Natalie was able to do out of an evil act. Her death meant that no one else needed to die. No other family needed to suffer.
But 30 years on, Frankston is again riven by fear that Paul Denya could walk free and kill again.
He enjoyed the killings. He said that himself. Do those violent fantasies ever go away?
What is your age and date of birth?
21 years old. I was born on the 14th of April 1972.
Just 32 hours after he killed 17-year-old Natalie Russell, Paul Denya was being grilled by detectives. They were convinced they'd caught the serial killer who'd terrorised the community of Frankston for 7 weeks.
When we saw you down at your flat this afternoon, I noticed a number of cuts on your fingers.
Yeah.
Can you just put your hands flat on the desk here, so that just right up here? Oh, sorry, that's not too far.
He still has blood under his fingernails there.
Yeah, it'd have to be the case because he was absolutely soaked in it in killing Natalie.
It's quite confronting to see that, given we know what happened.
Here you are, touching the hands of a killer who's killed 3 women.
Homicide detective Charlie Bazina is still in disbelief about what unfolded. During a break, more than 2 hours into questioning and away from the police camera, Denya suddenly confesses.
And just out of the blue, I think his words were, I did the 3 of them. 3 of what? Well, those 3 women you've been asking me about, I killed them.
You told Detective Overlockton that you were responsible for the murders of the three women. Is that correct?
And when we learnt that, the elation was out of this world.
You remember it? Oh, you okay?
Having been at the crime scenes, what these women would have gone through, and then now to have the person who's admitting to it. Our job was done basically at that stage, and then it was going to be up to the courts to convict him. I think we went to the pub about 7 in the morning, had 1 beer.
Just 1 beer?
We were exhausted, mentally and physically.
Given the gravity of his crimes, it seems unbelievable that Paul Denya now has a shot at freedom. In 1993, he pleaded guilty to the murders and was sentenced to life with no minimum, a sentence that was overturned on a technicality. allowing him to apply for parole after 30 years. And that's what Denyer did this year, as soon as he was eligible. He was refused, but under the current laws, he can, in theory, apply again and again. As a criminal that you've come face to face with and investigated, how do you rate Paul Denyer?
I rate him in one of the highest categories of a killer that I've ever dealt with, without remorse or mercy. That's why it's so important for the government to legislate specifically to keep this killer in jail.
The Victorian government has previously made so-called one-man laws to ban parole for mass shooter Julian Knight and the Russell Street bomber Craig Minogue. But much to the disappointment of his victims' families, it ruled out doing the same for Paul Denyer. Opposition MP David Limbrick was Natalie Russell's boyfriend at the time of her murder. All these years later, he's determined to keep her killer behind bars.
So it seems that the fight will continue, from your end at least.
Yeah, until we get some sort of reassurance that, we're satisfied that he can't harm another woman, then we have to continue that fight.
Like all prisoners, Paul Denyer is banned from writing to his victims' families. But earlier this year, he cruelly exploited a loophole to send a letter to the MP.
Prisoners are allowed to write to lawyers and members of parliament, so I received a letter.
In it, Denyer pleaded for his freedom,
I am not a danger to society.
insisting he has rehabilitated,
I will never go back to the Frankston Langwarrin area.
and making the ludicrous suggestion that David might want to take up his cause.
He had this idea that I might become an advocate for him, which is pretty concerning in itself that anyone might think that. And it sort of just led me to believe that, he really is just as dangerous now. It just shows that, that lack of empathy and humanity is still there.
Any part of you believe that he could be reformed?
I don't think so, no.
This is where he starts.
The letter is among one of many that forensic psychologist Carla Ferrari has assessed. She believes it reveals much about Denyer's prospects for rehabilitation.
There was no real evidence of change, and normally you would expect to see someone explaining, I've had all this time to reflect. I have, spent 30 years, delving into myself, what was going on at that time for me. There was none of that.
I'm no expert, of course, but from what you're saying, he sounds dangerous still.
I would say that's fair.
In 2003, 10 years into his sentence, the unremorseful killer of women declared he wanted to be one. A series of letters penned from prison detailed how Denyer identified as a transgender woman called Paula.
He explains that it was something he'd suppressed for so long, and then he goes on to say that, committing these crimes was to try and destroy those feelings that he had, which doesn't really make sense because they never came up in the psychological evaluation, in the psychiatric evaluation, in the police interview.
But even if he had suppressed it for all those years, never mentioned it to anyone, is it an explanation for the savage murders he committed?
Absolutely not.
Whether Denyer truly felt trapped in the wrong body, no one will ever know for sure. But it's clear one of his goals was to be moved to a women's prison. It was a strategy that ultimately failed, and so in 2014, Paula reverted back to Paul.
Well, he signed off the letter to David as Paul. Paula doesn't exist.
Darren Russell, older brother to Denyer's last victim, Natalie, finds that baffling. He's a doctor who just happens to be a leading expert in transgender health.
He's changed back, and That is not a common thing for a transgender person to do. It's very unusual. So again, he said that he hated women, and that's one of the reasons he killed them. He'd been fantasising about killing women since he was 14 years of age. He'd been actively stalking women for some years. He's a man who detested women, and now he was becoming a woman. I couldn't understand that.
As the site of his sister's murder, this is a place Darren has understandably chosen to avoid. But today, to mark the 30th anniversary of her death, he's returned to Nat's track, the path that was named in his sister's honour.
She would have been 47 this year and, may have had a family of her own. So it's the fact we'll never have that.
For all the families of Paul Denye's victims, their loss can never be replaced. But foremost in their minds now is that this serial killer be denied the possibility of ever again inflicting the pain they've suffered.
Denye was diagnosed with a sadistic personality disorder. So he has shown himself to take delight in other people's suffering, in hurting other people, in tormenting other people, in torturing other people. That's how he got his kicks. We've got no reason to believe that's changed.
So Denye still remains a risk in your mind?
I think history tells us that these individuals generally don't redeem themselves, and it's only when they're physically no longer capable of harm that we should be thinking of releasing them from custody.
30 years ago, in the Melbourne's seaside suburb of Frankston, Paul Denye slaughtered 3 young women without mercy or remorse. The serial killer's crimes were so despicable, so depraved, it was unthinkable that he could ever be freed from prison. But as we reported 2 months ago, that was the nightmare prospect faced by the families of his victims after Denye became eligible for parole. Now, however, their courageous fight to keep this killer behind bars is finally over, following an extraordinary shake-up of Victoria's laws. The families and friends of those murdered by serial killer Paul Denye have endured 3 decades of pain and torment. This week, though, came a rare moment of relief.
The victims' families told me about their experience of the justice system, and frankly, we can do better. And through this legislation, we will do better.
Victoria's Attorney-General, Jacqueline Symes, announced a raft of legislative changes that will keep the killer behind bars for good.
We're introducing legislation which puts beyond doubt the eligibility of Paul Denye for parole. That gives ultimate certainty to the families who were victims of his unspeakable actions.
What happened then?
I pulled out a knife and stabbed her many times in the throat.
Right.
Over a 7-week period in 1993, Paul Denye stalked his prey on the streets of the Melbourne suburb of Frankston, savagely murdering 3 young women at random. 18-year-old Elizabeth Stevens, 22-year-old Debbie Freem, and 17-year-old Natalie Russell.
And I had blood all over here, all over my hands, on my arms, blood all over the place.
Chillingly, Denye never showed a flicker of emotion.
Denye was diagnosed with a sadistic personality disorder. So he has shown himself to take delight in other people's suffering, in hurting other people, in tormenting other people, in torturing other people. That's how he got his kicks.
2 months ago, Natalie's brother, Darren Russell, spoke to 60 Minutes about the family's fight to keep the serial killer in jail. You have not spoken about this before, publicly. Do you feel a need to do that now?
It's important that we keep talking about this, that we keep it in the public's mind. He was an extremely callous, dangerous, and I don't use this word lightly, evil person. We've got no reason to believe that's changed.
As a result of an appeals court ruling, unthinkably, Paul Denyer became eligible for parole earlier this year. He immediately applied and was refused. But under the existing laws, Denyer could apply again and again, a prospect that filled the families of his victims with dread. Any part of you believe that he could be reformed?
I don't think so, no.
Victorian MP David Limbrick, the former boyfriend of Natalie Russell, spearheaded the family's campaign. This week, a breakthrough.
We will do better for the victims of Paul Denyer, but we will also do better for more victims in the state of Victoria.
On Tuesday, the Victorian government announced a suite of reforms, not only to forever deny Paul Denyer the chance of freedom, but to give the parole board the power to keep 32 other high-risk prisoners behind bars for longer.
Our goal was to make sure that Denyer can never harm another girl the way that he hurt Nat, and it looks like that's going to happen now with what the government's proposing.
For the families of those so cruelly murdered, common sense has finally prevailed.
I think history tells us that these individuals generally don't redeem themselves, and it's only when they're physically no longer capable of harm that we should be thinking of releasing them from custody.
In the column of history marked Most Evil Australians, the name Ivan Robert Marco Milat features prominently. So the death of the 74-year-old murdering monster will be mourned by few. Instead, it will more likely be welcome news, especially for the families and friends of the 7 young adventurers whose lives he so cruelly stole in the Belanglo State Forest south of Sydney. When you look at Ivan Milat in the last days of his life, he looked like just a frail, old, pathetic man. Who do you see?
I see a frail, old, pathetic man that, to me, he died a long time ago. And he's nothing but an evil killer.
Ivan Milat's brother, Boris, is calling it as he sees it. Blood ties mean nothing. Death cannot soften his judgment of a man who callously killed so many.
Don't forget, this man has proven to kill 7 backpackers in a murderous way, tore at them like animals, tortured their bodies even after they were dead. This man is just an evil serial killer, right to the last bone of him. He was dead to me a long time ago.
Tonight, Boris wants to remember the young victims of Ivan Milat and to speak of his relief that his brother is dead. He is the only member of the Milat clan to publicly denounce the notorious serial killer in life and now in death. Boris, as you sit here today, are you proud or embarrassed to be a Milat?
Embarrassed. I am definitely embarrassed to be a Milat.
So no grief at all?
No grief for Ivan whatsoever. None at all. He deserves where he is and deserves what he's got.
So how much grief would there be within the Milat family with the death of Ivan?
It'd be a big loss. This would be poor Ivan, poor Ivan, poor Ivan. You know, poor bugger's locked up there. You know, even though he's guilty, but poor Ivan. That's it. I'm a voice in the wilderness yelling out to them, and they think I'm just being vicious towards Ivan. And the thing is here, And I just want the truth out there.
So what are they denying?
They're denying that he did anything. They're denying that he killed anybody. They are saying that the police made it all up. It all comes back to, he didn't do it, he didn't do it. They must have an IQ that's small. You know, a 12-year-old child would figure out, with the evidence they put there, oh yeah, but it's all tainted. It was put up by the police. They planted this and they planted that, and they put the bottle in here and they put the tent in here, and the evidence there, even a 12-year-old child would stamp his papers guilty.
Why is it that they're not horrified like you are at what Ivan Milat did?
I think it's just an acceptance that they just love the guy. They just love the guy.
How does it feel for you, Boris, that your family would prefer to support a psychopath serial killer to
It
you?
hurts. It hurts bad. It hurts bad. Well, Christ, I'll shut me trap up and snip me lips tomorrow, and if you get out here and call it out for what it is. There's people out there just like you with daughters that have been torn to pieces by this psychopath. And they're not, and it doesn't mean nothing. Oh, his life's important, theirs is not. Get the hell. You've got to be crazy to believe that sort of crap.
Why do you think he killed those people?
It would have been a bit of money involved. It would have been the joy of killing too. That would have been involved. The thrill, the anxiety. But most of all, he could get away with it. No, he just didn't have empathy for people. He had all the bull dust, and that's it.
His love came from killing people.
I would say his love come from killing people. And I don't know if it was quite as blunt as that, but he got a charge out of it, obviously. We think. Might have been other motives. It might have been that he just seen beautiful things and he'd like to destroy them, be it male or female. Doesn't matter.
When you learned about how those backpackers were killed and toyed with, played with, brutally murdered...
Oh, don't even talk to me about it. Don't want to go there, I'll get emotional. I just...
Why will you get emotional about that? It's okay. Okay, we'll just take a moment. It's okay. That's all right. Yeah. Just take a moment.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. What's going on?
Nothing. What can I say? You just pulling on my heartstrings there a bit.
Well, I'm a bit surprised by your reaction.
I don't want to go in that part of it, okay? Yeah, because that upsets me. People have got a right to die properly, an accident or whatever. You don't need some mongrel to come and do those things.
No, it is. It's just too awful to think about, isn't it?
You have to change the line of question. It's okay. Move on. Let's get it going. Please.
Okay. Well, you know, I just, I guess what I'm trying to understand from your perspective is what was going on in Ivan's brain. You know, what turned him into that monster?
Just the way he was. 1 in 10. It's insane. What the old man used to say.
Born that way?
You're going to find if you went right, if you could have got into his head, that there was something wrong with him. It has to be, you know. But for anyone to do all those sort of things. No, I don't like thinking about how they died. That's still with me, even though you're going on to other questions. Because it's really terrible. And if you think I get upset, what about their mother and father and brothers and sisters? You know. Anyhow, yeah. Keep asking if you want to.
The judge at Ivan Milat's trial said it was inevitable that someone else was involved in those crimes. Who could that be?
It's none of the boys. I got to tell you that, Dan.
But did you at any time suspect or worry that some of your other brothers might have been involved?
Never.
What was the reaction at the time when suspicion was raised about both Richard and Wally being accessories to Ivan?
Richard has not got killer in him. He himself was never, in my books, ever remotely connected with that.
Or Wally?
Wally wouldn't be capable of it.
Do you believe that Ivan Milat was powerful enough to take down two people at a time?
Yes, easy done. He could do it with one hand behind his back. Of course, what are you going to do when I got a 45 stuck in your face? What are you going to do? Tie him up or I'll shoot you too. Okay? That's it. It's all over. That's it. Or, bang, you're dead straight away, and the other one there is my pickings.
How do you think your family is going to react to you speaking out on the death of your brother?
I'm putting it out there on the family now, and I can't push it enough. You know, these mongrels hate my guts because I'm one guy that speaks out. But somebody's got to tell these mums and dads why their kids died. You know, why this mongrel thinks he can wipe them out like a dirty rag and get around and smile and how you going? I haven't know all this and we love you still, even though you destroy lives. You know, I know I'm being dramatic, Tom, but that's okay.
Do you think that the rest of the Milat family had that power, had that influence if they wanted to get Ivan Milat to confess to the backpacker murders and to anything else?
They have the power.
It's too late now.
Too late now, he's gone now. It isn't even about the backpackers, it's about their mums and dads. They're gone, those poor people are gone. It's their live ones. You know, I would have walked heaven and earth not to see them people there, you know, killed. Just stop, think about it. It's the horrible, horrible person that done it. And seeing his dad now, he's where he is. And the whole saga is best forgotten, but remember the victims. Remember these innocent people as well.
Police describe the murders as premeditated, committed with unspeakable horror, cruelty and savagery.
1993, and the Belanglo State Forest, south of Sydney, gives up its tragic secrets.
We now have 7 bodies recovered.
7 young backpackers savagely slain.
We don't know the cause of death in the present case.
By a monster on the loose.
But we do have a serial killer.
The bodies of 2 British backpackers were the first to be found. Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, both 22, and both subjected to the most awful deaths.
It would have been quite horrendous what they went through.
Police spent much of today searching for a murder weapon.
As Roger Maynard reported at the time, the terror and pain the young friends were forced to suffer was unimaginable.
One of the most terrible things about the way they died was that their spinal cord was cut, thereby not killing them, but paralysing them. And the theory is that they were allowed to remain in that situation for some time, while perhaps the murderer went away and then came back later to finish them off. Now, who would do that sort of thing? You know, they weren't killed instantly. They had to suffer, you know, for hours or maybe a day or more before they finally died.
The chilling details appalled us all, but would forever haunt Joanne's mourning parents, Jill and Ray Walters.
These people who have done these to these girls, that they are just proper animals and they ought to be shot.
But it was just one man, Ivan Milat.
5 of the victims were stabbed to death, one of them decapitated. The other 2 were shot in the head.
His actions so twisted and so evil that to the world he'll always be known simply and notoriously as the backpacker murderer.
When they did arrest him, I was at work and I'd seen it on the TV and I couldn't believe it.
Maureen is Ivan's former sister-in-law. What aspect of it couldn't you believe?
It was when they were arresting Ivan. Yeah, it was like that's the man I knew that was a nice person, didn't have guns and wasn't really violent.
Maureen was once married to Ivan's brother, Wally.
Has the place changed much since you were here as a young woman?
Yeah. Yes, a great deal, yeah. Yeah, it's a lot busier. And curb and guttering wasn't there.
Maureen was just 14 or 15 when she started hanging out with the Milats here at the old family home. Taking us back to the 70s, you can still see Wally's name etched into their concrete driveway.
What was it about the Milat boys that you liked so much?
I guess you're just coming into puberty and it's boys and they were next door and they weren't at school. They weren't your school friends. And they were always a bit rugged. They played with cars and like probably what attracted me to Wally, what he never wore any shoes, just jeans and no shirt. He was quite muscly and he was all right to talk to.
But the teenager had to wait a little while to meet Ivan, who was then serving time for armed robbery. On his release, whether it was true or not, he told Maureen a tale that was disturbingly prophetic.
One particular time he picked me up and he drove me home. On the way home, I said, "Oh, you're in jail. What did you go to jail for? Did you murder somebody?" Because I thought that's what people went to jail for. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I killed a man with a knife and I buried him in the bush." Okay, and he was laughing. And I don't know whether it was a true thing or a story. I just guess I'll never know.
What does your gut tell you? What does your instinct tell you?
Deep down, I think it was true. I just don't want to think that he could be capable of doing something like that.
Well, he's capable of doing that and plus plenty more.
Yeah, exactly. But at the time, I just thought, no, he couldn't do that. He's too nice.
Back then, Maureen found her brother-in-law charming and attentive.
Sometimes Wally'd go off shooting and he might come and visit me.
So while Wally was shooting, Ivan was visiting you?
Yes.
Were you intimate with Ivan?
That's a part of my life I'm not really proud of, but I had been at certain points, not all the time. So, and just things happen, on and off, maybe a year or so, not a long time.
Did you think at any stage that you might have been in love with Ivan or that there was a future with Ivan?
No, way back it was probably a fantasy because he was muscly and attractive that way. But no.
A fantasy of what?
You know, oh yeah, look all right. But yeah, when you think, oh, I don't want you for a husband.
How do you feel now knowing that you did have a relationship with a serial killer, a psychopath?
Yeah, it's a bit creepy. I just don't like to think about that.
Ivan was clearly used to taking what he wanted. As well as Maureen, he had an affair with another sister-in-law, Marilyn, who had his child, a daughter named Lenice. Ivan's brother, Boris, who was married to Marilyn at the time, raised the child as his own, despite the deception. How long was Ivan Milat having an affair with your wife?
Apparently it never stopped. And I really wanted to walk away from the whole lot, but there was a little girl involved. And
did you think Lenice was your daughter?
I always knew that she wasn't my daughter because I suspected what was going on.
Did you and Ivan have a blow-up? Did you say
Always.
to him, you are having an affair with my wife, this has got to
Yeah,
stop,
yeah.
or what happened?
I just said to him, well, leave me alone.
Leave
I
her
put
alone?
a knife on him. When I caught him up in the house the second time, something said to me, something's not right. I ripped the cupboard door open. There he is inside.
That must
At
have
the
been
cupboard
awful.
door, shivering and shaking like this. I said, I ought to kill you. I ought to kill you now. And he's shivering and shaking.
Can I just ask, considering what Ivan Milat went on to do, does any part of you wish that you had shot him, that you had killed him?
People have said that to me. Even the police have said that to me. You should have shot him. Well, you know.
No, I'm not saying you should have. I'm just
12...
saying, do you wish you had have?
If I know he was going to harm these people, yes. But it's not in me to take a life unless I'm defending my own.
In your opinion, John, is the world a better place now that Ivan Milat is dead?
Absolutely, without question. We don't need him.
With Ivan Milat's death, the only regret for retired New South Wales Police Assistant Commissioner John Laycock is the lost chance to expose Milat's darkest secrets.
He was a blight on our society. There's a lot of questions to be answered and probably never will be.
Do you believe that there are more bodies?
I suspect so, yes.
Do you have any idea of how many?
No idea whatsoever.
In the 70s, John Laycock was a police officer in Western Sydney who knew the Milat family.
You can call them wild and you can call them feral. There was constant police activity at their place in early hours of the morning, and police were coming and going to the extent that I think they were chalking up frequent flyer points at one stage.
John would be critical to cracking the case against Milat. He was struck by how similar the backpacker murders were to a rape case back in the 70s. Back then, Ivan Milat had picked up two hitchhikers, tied them up at knife point, and raped one of the women. He would get off the rape charge on a technicality, but lucky for the backpacker murder task force, John had a long memory. What was it that led to you thinking that Ivan Milat might be good for the backpacker murders?
Ivan Milat had been looked at as a person of interest in addition to many others. I suggested then that many years ago that Ivan had a similar MO, picking up hitchhikers at the crossroads at Liverpool. I suggested the task force have a look, and it was a major change of focus for the task force that was able to pull him out and put him on the front page.
How big a breakthrough was it in terms of making Ivan Milat the prime suspect?
That little snippet, it was there all the time, but nobody had found it. So, as I keep saying, it's all in the documents.
By now, Maureen and Ivan's brother Wally were divorced, but that didn't stop detectives knocking on her door as part of the investigation into Ivan.
I thought maybe it was a robbery or something like that. I did not think it would be so horrendous. And they were talking to me for about 5 hours. And I said, look, I've got a photo here. If I find it, I'll give it to you. So that was the photo that they wanted.
The photo was taken in January 1991. Just 11 days later, Ivan would use this car to abduct German backpacker Simone Schmiedel before murdering her. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's not good. Not good. That upsets me, to what he did to those people. to those kids. It upsets me for the parents. And, yeah, it's just, it's all horrific. Sorry. Yeah, and I like to know him, and he was a nice person. And then he thought he had the right to do that to somebody. And yeah, what they would have gone through would have been horrific.
And you never saw a glimpse of that monster?
No, no.
On the day this photo was taken, Ivan offered Maureen one chilling piece of advice.
It's only what he said when he came to visit. You know, did kids hitchhike? They shouldn't hitchhike. There might be rat bags on the road like me. You know, I suppose I didn't even take that serious, you know. I mean, you go, well, I hope if you see a hitchhiker, you're going to pick them up. They're going from A to B, and...
Yeah, sadly, he did pick them up.
He did.
Police were closing in, but the investigation would ultimately hinge on one eyewitness, the one who got away to tell of the terror they must have all felt.
You were wandering along here?
Yes.
Looking for something to drink?
Yeah.
So it all comes back?
Oh, yeah.
As Paul Onions told 60 Minutes in his one and only ever interview, it was January 1990 when he accepted the generous offer of a ride.
This is where the journey starts.
And you meet your first Australian?
Yeah.
That man was Ivan Milat.
As Milat drove toward his killing ground, Paul began to sense him getting edgy.
Roger Maynard, who closely followed the case, says Onion's gut instinct saved his life that day.
He was driving down the highway with Milat. Milat stops on the side of the road, ostensibly to get a cassette out to put in the his radio.
That was his excuse, really, to get some cassettes from under the seat to put some music on. Well, it just seemed odd because there was actually cassettes in between us.
Produces a revolver, and then Onions sees a coil of rope, and that really, really scares him.
But as soon as I seen the rope, I thought, oh, that's going to be you know, it's going to take a bit of time. He's going to do whatever he wants.
So Onions jumps out of the car and realises that if he's going to save his life, he's got to escape. And he runs down the highway, zigzagging across the road, while Milat is pursuing him with his gun, shooting at Onions.
I thought the next vehicle that comes over the bow of the hill, I'm just going to stop it no matter what.
What, jump in front of it?
Yeah.
In desperation, Paul throws himself in front of a people mover driven by Joanne Berry.
He just about screamed, help me, he's got a gun. And that was very clear.
When you did look back, as the car retreated, did you see the look in his face?
Well, like a smirk, like. It's a bit strange the way he was looking. And that's the last impression I had, like.
And after that, of course, Mrs. Berry and Onions go to the local police station at Bowral and report the incident. But remarkably, nothing happens. And so a great missed opportunity there, one of many missed opportunities, I suspect.
If that opportunity hadn't been missed, what could that mean for the other lives lost?
Certainly some lives would have been saved if Milat had been apprehended at that time.
2 years later, and back in the UK, Paul Onions catches the news headlines, sees reports of the terrible fate of the missing backpackers, and points Australian authorities to his original police report. Investigators fly him to Sydney to identify his attacker.
I went through all the pictures, and that was the one that gave me initial reaction. It made me uneasy when I looked at it. And then when I looked closer, I said to him, that's the person who I think I met that day.
It was Ivan Milat. Police swooped on his Eaglevale home where they found a treasure trove of evidence. Gun parts from the murder weapon, electrical tape, backpacks and sleeping bags of the victims.
He was always in competition with the police and the authorities, and I would say he thought he would never get caught.
How critical was the evidence found at the Milat house?
There was a link between the deceased's people and Ivan Milat and the crimes. It's pretty important stuff, particularly if you've got names on property which had occurred that belonged to some of the backpackers.
In further raids, police found more evidence in the homes of Milat's mother and his two brothers, Wally and Richard, who both deny any involvement. But at trial, Milat's own lawyer argued police had arrested the wrong family member. During this interview with Richard Carlton in 1996, Richard Milat reiterated his innocence.
So, Mr. Richard Milat, give me your explanation, please, of how come Carolyn Clark, this is the woman that got 10 bullets to the head, her sleeping bag cover, her sleeping mat and her tent were found in your garden shed.
That's only hearsay.
No, it's not hearsay at all, it's the evidence.
Evidence of who?
And the sleeping bag of Joanne Walters, a 22-year-old lass, was found in a cupboard in that same shed. Can you explain, please?
I can't explain it. What do you mean explain? How it got into the cupboard? How it was there?
Yeah.
I can't be sure.
Well,
How?
if you can't be sure, then is it reasonable for the likes of me and others to speculate that maybe you had something to do with it getting there?
Well, I don't know. You
Just
want to
don't
trust
know.
the police?
Well, for a moment I'll trust you if you tell me.
Yeah, well, I can't say.
Or would you accept that it looks a bit sus then?
No, I don't accept that it looks a bit sus.
Despite the judge at his trial believing the killer hadn't acted alone, Ivan Milat was the only one found guilty of the murders. The evidence was overwhelming, but his family, including sister-in-law Caroline, here with husband William Milat, continued to maintain his innocence.
Well, what would you need to convince you that your brother did it?
He would have to tell us. He would have to use those words, "I did it." And then I would believe him. But he has actually said to me, "I have not done this," and I believe him. With all my soul, I believe him.
I believe he did it. He's not innocent.
Why do you think so many of the Milats believe that Ivan Milat is innocent?
Oh, can't understand that, but they all stick together. They're a strong group. They're a strong family. And they'll stick together no matter what.
And the prison number.
Goulburn. It's a good address to have.
Yeah.
You're a prisoner.
I must admit, when they started arriving at my post office, the post office staff gave me some raised eyebrows when they saw the name on the back.
In 1996, Ivan Milat was given 7 life sentences for the murder of 7 backpackers. From the confines of his prison cell, Milat chose author Roger Maynard to be his pen pal, always protesting his innocence in his prodigious letters.
Does he talk about death at all in his letters?
He
About
does.
dying?
He talks on a couple of occasions about death. That cancer, he says, is a real bastard. God's way to keep the faithful a bit more faithful. And Milat says, those end-of-life thoughts, of course, nothing matters once you're dead. Mostly you are soon forgotten, though my relatives will remember a long while after I die. And then he finishes, if I died tomorrow, I lose the possibility to establish my innocence. So he's clearly taking his guilt to the grave.
Before he was in the throes of esophageal cancer, Milat wrote to Roger for 8 years, hoping to convince him he'd been set up.
Milat would always say, oh, it was planted, I was framed, but he would always have an answer. He would always have a reason or an answer to support what he was saying, you know. And
did you ever believe him?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, not once. You have to accept that he was deluded. I think he was. He was so used to denying his involvement that he really genuinely thought he didn't do it. Ultimately, you know.
Really?
Oh yeah. I'm sure he got himself into that sort of frame of mind.
If Ivan Milat's letters
do not hold confessions or information about other murders, potential murders he committed. What is the value of them?
I think it probably offers an insight into his mind more than anything, the fact that he can continue to deny it. I was always hopeful that he might drop his guard, that he might say something that could incriminate him, but he never did.
How would you describe the mind of Ivan Milat?
I think the mind of a monster. He was definitely a man with a very evil side to him, a man who got his kicks out of these deviant acts, if you like, and they weren't just straightforward murders. There was a great element of deviancy to them.
From his letters, did you get a sense of whether he was crazy?
No, I didn't. Not at all. I thought he was a very sane individual, apart from, his depraved activities, if you like, I think he was very clear-minded. I think he knew what he was doing. He had a very clear understanding of the case against him, and how he might try to fight it, how he might try to demonstrate his innocence.
There was a desperate hope that in the face of his own death, the serial killer would finally confess to all the lives he'd taken. But even on his deathbed, mercy was beyond Ivan Milat, just as his former cop foe John Laycock predicted.
He wouldn't plead guilty to breathing, and he certainly wouldn't confess to a murder or to a homicide.
And you knew that all along?
Yeah. Look, I think if you drove your car out to the jail to interview Ivan about other crimes, you may as well keep the motor running.
"74-year-old Ivan Milat has finally succumbed to cancer. By all accounts, his death would have been painful. Perhaps some comfort for the families he tore apart when he started his mindless murder spree 30 years ago. It certainly doesn't seem to trouble John, Ivan's former lover Maureen, or his brother Boris. And his manner of death, esophageal cancer, what do you think about that?
Oh, well, they're the cards that were played to him, so can't say too much about that.
You certainly can't say anything sympathetic.
I'm not sympathetic, no.
What is your emotion around the death of Ivan Milat?
None, I suppose. I don't think anything about it at all. To me, he died 20-odd years ago when he was arrested for this. Wasn't the person I knew. I'd rather remember the person I knew. A nice person. Yeah, though I have no feelings whatsoever. It's just a person that's died.
Have you given any thought, do you have any belief on what happens to Ivan Milat now that he's dead?
None at all, except a big relief that the world is rid of one of the, or Australia is rid of one of the notorious serial killers and psychopaths, and that's where he is. It's a damn shame that he couldn't have been coerced in with the rest of his loving family to admit to it.
A serial killer is someone who hunts strangers, acts alone, kills violently again and again, and is always male. Lee Wuornos fits the profile perfectly. Except Lee is a woman, perhaps history's first female serial killer. Over a 12-month period in the American state of Florida, Lee Wuornos killed 7 men. She said it was self-defence, yet at her trial asked to be executed. Unusual? Well, everything about this case is unusual. Not least Lee Wuornos herself, a woman the judge said was evil. The dark woods off Florida's highways. It was down dirt roads like this that 7 men met the madness of one angry woman. Lee Wuornos murdered them, robbed them, and then drove home in their cars.
Those men were shot, just shot in self-defense, boom, boom, boom. You know, they weren't cut up, they weren't sliced up, no OJ jazz, you know. And he said, I did the most horrendous crime in the whole wide world.
Not true?
I guess not. All they were was shot and left. If it was a horrendous crime, why didn't I shoot them between the eyes, cut their penis off, stick it in their mouth, you know, do all kinds of gross stuff? All they were was shot and left, you know?
She's been called the damsel of death and the hooker from hell. But embellishment aside, the story of history's first female serial killer is macabre enough, even without its supporting cast of characters. Then there's the serial killer's new mother. She first met Lee after her arrest and then legally adopted her.
Sheba. You know, we believe in the Holy Spirit, and so we feel it was him prompting us that this person really needed help, and she had nobody, and just reach out to her. So we did.
I met her in a bar.
And there's Lee's gay lover, who betrayed her to the police.
We were sitting on the floor watching TV, and she just come out and said, I have something to tell you. And I asked her what, and she said that she had shot and killed a man that day.
Lee, it sounds like you've been betrayed by everyone.
That's right, I was. That's why I don't care if I'm executed and leave this planet.
If anyone was destined to end up here on death row, it was probably Lee Wuornos. Psychologists sketch a portrait of a damaged person with a lurid history of abuse that began in childhood. Abandoned by her teenage mother when she was just 6 months old, Lee was raised by her alcoholic grandmother and a cruel grandfather who regularly beat her with his belt buckle. When she was 2, her father committed suicide in jail, where he was doing time for kidnapping and raping a child. By 13, she'd been raped and was pregnant. At 14, she quit school. And when her grandfather kicked her out of home, Lee Wuornos' life on the road began. From age 15, Lee Wuornos worked prostitution's lowest and most dangerous trade. A hitchhiking hooker turning tricks from exit to exit on Florida's interstate highways.
Basically, I'd say I have 5 to 6 guys per day interested. They could be interested in 30, they could be interested in 40, they could be interested for 100. I wasn't too high priced, so I could keep the customers satisfied and, you know.
That all changed when she turned 33. After years of abuse and degradation at the hands of men, Lee Wuornos started evening the score. The killings all began like this. A middle-aged man pulled over to pick up Lee Wuornos. That's the first of just 2 facts on which everyone agrees. The way Lee tells it, she was just a hooker trying to turn a trick, and the men knew it. But the state of Florida maintains she tricked her victims by posing as a damsel in distress. The men thought they were helping her out. Either way, the second fact on which everyone agrees is that Lee Wuornos shot them dead. Maybe you were just born bad.
Boy, I don't know about you. I'm telling you, man. No, I wasn't born bad. You guys got it. See, I'm trying to tell you, man, they lied. They lied so bad to you all.
But you've been convicted of killing 7 men.
Everybody's looking at the number.
Does that not... You killed 7 men, 7 strangers. Does that not make you a serial killer?
So I didn't kill them every day, did I? Did I go out there every day and say, I'm going to kill? If I did, there would be hundreds.
Well, no, it took you 12 months.
Yeah. And that's a hell of a lot of men I went through before the next jerk came along, and I used protection, like a condom.
So it was
AIDS.
It was self-defense.
Yeah.
Lee, the first one, perhaps. The second, maybe. But
So what?
7 times?
So what?
Lee Wuornos began the last day of her miserable life on the road here, ordering her first beer at 11 in the morning. Close to broke, as usual, it was Lee's style to hustle quarters for the jukebox so she could listen to her favourite song. On this day, that was made easier by two undercover cops. They struck up a conversation with her, bought her some more beer, and then convinced her to step outside. Lee was prepared for anything but the 6 Florida police officers who arrested her. It was from this point the story of the first female serial killer becomes truly perplexing. First, her videotaped confession. "Go ahead and put the electric chair to me. I should have never done it," she told police. But by the time of her trial, Lee was pleading self-defence.
She loved you, didn't she?
Yes?
She said she'd do anything for you, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Her case wasn't helped when Tyria Moore, now very much her ex-lover, turned star witness for the prosecution.
And in order for her to say what you wanted her to, you lied to her, right?
Yes.
But it gets worse. Tyria had another deal going with the arresting police. They were trying to sell Hollywood the movie rights to Lee Wuornos' life and crazy times.
Why did you lie to her about those number of things?
Because I wanted her to keep talking about the offences so I would be cleared.
District Attorney Rick Ridgway is one of the only officials willing to talk about the Wuornos case anymore. The police certainly won't, out of sheer embarrassment.
There was a tremendous amount of almost frenzy about the case, and everybody wanted to get a scoop on the next guy about the case, and there were so many people who were willing to pander to that in order to be the one who gets quoted or who gets the movie made about him.
People from your own sheriff's office?
Well, unfortunately, yes, they did.
As the prosecutor, were you dismayed by that?
Well, to put it mildly, we went through the roof when we found out about it.
In the end, it was only the producers of this American TV movie who were able to cash in on Lee's story. Tyria and the police's conspiracy to get rich quick came to nothing once they were caught. But that hasn't stopped Lee Wuornos suspecting that someone, somewhere, wants to exploit her name.
It's making me get bitter, evil, angry. I've never been before in my life. Worse than even out there with those men. This is evil, what those people have done to me.
Do you feel anger or even hatred towards men?
I never hated men, but now I do. I mean, not all. I have a category. I hate those male... God. I hate those male cops. Real bad, because they're dirtballs. The cops, the judges, the lawyers, they're all male.
I have made peace with my Lord, and I have asked forgiveness.
The final twist in this already mad tale was when Lee Wuornos decided to plead no contest to the remaining 6 murder charges.
I sentence you in case number 91-463 to death for the murder of Troy Burris.
Her lawyer, Steve Glazer, found himself in the bizarre position of helping his client take the express route to the electric chair.
County case number, I sentence you to death for the murder of David Spears.
In effect, though, weren't you trying to kill your client?
It's not what I was trying to do, okay? It's what she wanted to have done to her. She was tired of being in the spotlight. She was tired of reporters and police and lawyers, everyone making a career off of her. She did not like the man-hating killer label. She didn't like the lesbian killer angle. She didn't like what people were saying about her. And she knows if she has to go to trial 5 more times, she's going to be for the next 10 years.
Do you still believe she was competent to make that decision?
Without a doubt.
Okay, there will be an automatic...
There's no sense in having me tormented for the rest of my life when I don't deserve to be tormented. I did what anybody else would do. And so there's only clemency or the chair. You make your pick, people, because that's the only way it's going to be.
Why did you adopt Lee Wuornos?
For one reason and one reason only. We wanted her to know what it felt like to be part of a family.
Born-again Christian Eileen Wuornos has a fondness for adopting stray animals. When she adopted Lee, she planned a life together on her farm. Now she'd be happy just to keep her alive.
That's it. Okay, that's about enough. There you go.
Well, tell me this, how did you counsel Lee?
I told her to go for the life in prison. I told her that that would be the best. I told her that God could use her within the prison to help other girls that were hurting, maybe didn't have a relationship with Jesus, and that she could really be used mightily there. And we fought bitterly over it. She said that no human being had the right to tell another human being what to do with their life.
Stop the murders, deter the crimes away.
Not much phases the singing lawyer Steve Glazer. Not the 3 heart attacks he's suffered since taking on this case, nor the criticism he's endured for seeking Lee Wuornos' execution.
And a rich man's never died upon the chair.
Has this case been good for your career?
No. But that's life, you know, you take oblada, life goes on, you try something else.
Is there anyone in this cast of characters who isn't a little bit crazy, a little bit eccentric?
I think you gotta be a little wild to be in this business.
If Steve Glazer has done his job, Lee Wuornos could be executed in this chair within 3 years. She's waived her right to appeal.
If he hears no last-minute stays from the governor's office, the electrode then is placed on top of the inmate's head. It's an actual cap with an electrode inside. It's secured onto his head. One of these electrodes here is then fastened onto the top of the headpiece.
Alone and lost in her own nightmare, Lee Wuornos is an American horror story. She could escape death row, but her bitterness and hate will see Lee become the first woman in over a century to be executed in Florida. Aren't you afraid?
No, I'm not afraid. I know where I'm going. I'm going to be with the Lord.
Thank you,
Take
too.
care of yourself and tell everybody else hi.
Do you want to die? You want to?
Oh man, if I was to leave this planet, it wouldn't be no big deal to me, because this is a wicked, wicked world. Wicked world.
Just thinking about it sends a chill up my spine. Right now, a serial killer is stalking his next victim in New York City. Watching, waiting, ready to strike. No one's sure how many women he's murdered, but more bodies are turning up by the day. The killer uses the internet to plan each move and lure his victims. A modern, methodical psychopath. But for the man they've dubbed the Long Island Ripper, murder isn't enough. He's taken to taunting his victims' families in the cruelest way possible. New York City and its iconic skyline. As cities go, this concrete metropolis is the star. But down in the shadows of those soaring skyscrapers right now, hidden among the Big Apple's 8 million residents, is a ruthless, calculating serial killer.
So far, police have discovered the skeletal remains of 9 and possibly 10 victims on this
remains of 2 more women.
One has the latest shocking find along Ocean Parkway, the second discovery of human remains in just a few hours.
This individual is planning these things out, and that makes him extremely dangerous. This is an individual who has this whole thing thought out and thought through, how he's going to do it, where he's going to do it, where he's going to get rid of the body.
New York is where the serial killer preys on his victims, and this is where he dumps the bodies. The windswept bush and driftwood beaches of Long Island. It's an easy drive from the madness of Manhattan, an ideal weekend getaway. But it's now taken on a sinister new identity, with the discovery of bones, body parts, and shallow graves.
Teams of searchers painstakingly hunted for victims of the serial killer, whose work has stumped investigators since the first 4 grisly finds.
So far, 11 bodies have been discovered. 4 of them now officially listed as victims of this serial killer that's been dubbed the Long Island Ripper.
But today's hunt uncovered more remains, including a skull.
When they found the bodies, we were actually watching TV, and they described, you know, about 5 foot tall, and we looked at each other and just started crying. We knew it was her before we even got the official phone call.
It was confirmation of Lynn Barthelomy's worst fears. Her missing daughter Melissa was in fact a victim of this serial killer. What sort of a girl, a young woman was she?
Very energetic. She was always happy. She loved to do hair, and she graduated top of her school.
24-year-old Melissa Bartholomew grew up in Buffalo, upstate New York. She dreamed of opening a beauty salon in her hometown, but not before she lived a little. Melissa packed her bags for the bright lights of the Big Apple. What drew her to New York City?
She kind of got hooked. All that fast hustle and bustle, and she was like, wow, I can go down there and I can make a lot of money, and then I can come home and I can open my own salon and buy a house. That was her dream.
Melissa did end up making a lot of money, but it was far from a dream. She became a stripper, then a call girl, a career she kept hidden from her mum.
I was terrified that she was there because she was so tiny and, you know, just such a loving person. You know, I just thought the people would eat her alive.
Melissa advertised her services on Craigslist, a website which sells everything, including sex. It seems this is how the Long Island Ripper found his victims, who were all escorts. Finding the bodies in this thick and tangled bush was both a blessing and a curse. Police now knew they were dealing with a serial killer, but there was no way he'd be returning to this spot. His secret dumping ground had been found. However, investigators believe that in some way it might challenge him, make him more hungry to kill again. Why do you think the Long Island Killer targets prostitutes?
One of the hardest problems for a sexual murderer isn't the abduction, to get a woman, to get a victim to go along with him. In prostitution, that problem is eliminated because prostitutes will go along with anybody. That's part of their job description.
Dr. Lou Schlesinger has studied serial killers for more than 30 years. He's an expert profiler, one of a handful of forensic psychologists trusted by the FBI.
In many of these cases, there's a symbolic significance to the offender with prostitutes. And in their mind, they sometimes rationalize that they're ridding the world of this type of evil.
Morally, he thinks he's some kind of crusader.
Some of them are hyper-moralistic. And so the prostitute then symbolizes to them fear and anger and all sorts of emotions attached to sexuality.
America has a perverse history of these twisted serial killers, so-called ordinary men who commit unspeakable crimes. Like Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. He confessed to more murders than any other American serial killer. Over 3 decades, he murdered 48 prostitutes in desolate bush areas. Finally caught, he was almost proud of his work.
Guilty, 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 guilty.
These guys have 2 prominent traits, narcissism and psychopathy. Narcissism is somebody who is incredibly egocentric and self-centered, can't get enough of themselves. Psychopathy is a little bit different. That's an individual who has no interpersonal bonding with others.
Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome.
Another serial killer, Rodney Alcala, had a huge ego. He became known as the dating game killer after he went on a TV show in the late 70s, right in the middle of a killing spree.
We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl. Okay.
And although this lady wasn't one of his victims, others weren't so lucky. Alcala was sentenced to death only last year for 5 murders in California alone. but is suspected of killing and photographing as many as 50 more of his female victims.
Congratulations, Rod. You did it.
Serial sexual murderers look like the rest of us. They talk like the rest of us. They behave like the rest of us. Many of them work, most blue-collar type jobs. Some are unemployed, but some have fairly good jobs. And that's just what the reality is. They're extraordinarily ordinary in terms of their everyday life, but their sexual deviancy and the way they act it out is clearly extraordinary.
And it's undoubtedly the same with the Long Island Ripper, to the sheer heartbreak of Melissa Barthelemy's family. But there's a very sick twist in this story. After the killer had dumped Melissa's body, he kept a souvenir, a trophy, her mobile phone. And from here in busy Times Square, he went through her contact list, found her sister's number, and started calling her.
Melissa's missing and we're all worried and freaked out. We haven't heard from her. And Amanda gets this call and caller ID comes up Melissa. And she answers the phone and there's a guy on the other end.
I hear a man's voice and I just my whole body shut down, I was just in shock.
It was the first of several taunting calls the serial killer made from Melissa's phone to her sister Amanda. She's the only one who's heard his voice. It's left her terrified of revealing her full identity. How would you describe the conversation?
Playing games with me, pretty much. It was every time my phone would ring, it was him. It was another clue to maybe getting closer to catching him.
How would you describe how this man sounded?
He was just very calm. I ask myself all the time why he called me.
Why do you think?
Just to torture someone else. Because I think he enjoys it.
What was he getting out of this?
I don't know, he's sick and twisted. Maybe something in Amanda's voice, because she was hysterical, she was crying. She tried to keep calm, tried to keep him on the phone long enough. The final call was that he killed her.
Each time, the killer makes the calls brief. Police can't pinpoint the exact location, but they have traced them to busy areas of central New York. Lou, it was from around here where the serial killer made one of his telephone calls to the victim's sister. Does that surprise you at such a public place?
No, in fact, it would probably be very typical. This is an individual who fits right in. He looks like everybody else. He's not a wild beast that you could recognize as being particularly dangerous.
What's he getting out of it by making that phone call?
It's a display of his sadism and cruelty. This is very arousing to him. This is sexually stimulating to him to have him know what he did to the victim and then to taunt the victim's family members.
So we knew, there are crazy people in the world. It's just a nightmare. I have dreams all the time of her being here.
Cherie Gilbert's sister, Shannon, was also an escort and also advertised her services on the internet site Craigslist. The last time Shannon was seen alive was on Long Island, when she made a panicked call to police before disappearing.
This is the client's house that my sister was last seen at on May 1st.
And it was in here where she made the call to police?
Yes, she first made the phone call to 911 in this house.
What was she saying? What did she say in that call?
She was saying, help me, he's trying to kill me.
The man who booked her services and owns this house has been questioned several times by police.
Prayers go out to the families.
So has a neighbour, a former police surgeon who's volunteered 3 interviews with investigators. But police believe the killer is still out there.
I can't imagine
who would do such a horrible, mean thing.
This lonely stretch of road is not giving up its secrets. It was Shannon's calls to police that eventually led to a search on Long Island and the discovery of the bush graves. But painfully, for her sister and Mother Mary, Shannon's body still hasn't been found.
How do you describe this place?
It's just evil. It's evil. There's so many lies and sin and sickness here. It's just creepy.
It doesn't matter what they did for a living. They're still all beautiful girls. And they were very young and they had a lot of life.
As police continue to search the area for more bodies, the Long Island Ripper is still out there. And like all serial killers, he won't be able to control his instincts forever and will almost certainly strike again.
He's going to make a mistake. They all do. And we're going to get this guy.
To his neighbours, Joseph D'Angelo was an unlikable, whinging curmudgeon. No doubt he would have bitched at the nickname they gave him too, Crazy Joe. But that's nothing compared with the label police and prosecutors in the United States are now trying to pin on him. They accuse D'Angelo of being the Golden State Killer, a serial murderer and rapist as vile as has ever lived. In the 1970s and 80s, it's alleged he wreaked havoc all over the state of California, all the while evading capture. And he might have gotten away with it forever, except for some of the most innovative detective work you'll ever see. In a court in Sacramento, California, an extraordinary and shocking piece of history is unfolding. A frail old man is being accused of monstrous crimes.
Joseph James D'Angelo, your true and correct legal name?
But looking at this 72-year-old now, only an angry glare gives away any hint that for decades, Joseph James D'Angelo was America's most wanted man, the Golden State Killer.
How confident are you that you have the right man?
It's 100%.
Not a shadow of a doubt?
Not a shadow of a doubt.
If D'Angelo is the notorious Golden State Killer, and the overwhelming evidence says he is, then he is evil beyond comprehension. Someone who committed at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and an untold number of burglaries. As if the violence wasn't enough, the Golden State Killer had another wicked signature. Of the victims he let live, he would often ring them weeks and months after the attacks to continue the terror. The taunting still haunts Margaret Wardlow and Jane Carson Sandler.
He's evil.
Psychological.
He is evil. He's a psychological, evil, psychotic, crazed madman.
Do you think it's just luck of the draw that he didn't kill you?
I think that had it been a couple years later, I think I probably would have died.
A cruel, sadistic serial predator, D'Angelo eluded capture for 42 years. Until a clever cop used some extraordinary nous to nail him.
That's his house there?
That is his house right there, where Joe D'Angelo was settled right here in the midst of this, and nobody had any idea.
Bringing the murderer to justice had been Detective Paul Hull's unsuccessful obsession for more than 20 long years. But frustration turned to fruition when he had the idea to upload DNA taken from the Golden State Killer's crime scenes to genealogy websites like Ancestry.com and Gedmatch.com. His hope was that someone searching their family tree might provide a full or partial DNA match.
So that's a bit like Tinder for DNA.
I guess that's a way to kind of look at it. The search takes anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. Within a day, I had the list of potential relatives to the Golden State Killer.
The results pointed to Joseph DeAngelo, a little old man living a double life in suburbia, hiding behind the facade of a family man, a law-abiding neighbour, and perhaps, most incredibly of all, a former police officer. This is Sacramento, capital of the world's 5th largest economy. It's the Canberra of California, home to the Golden State's Parliament, its Treasury, and the Governor's residence, and now, tragically, home to one of this country's worst ever serial predators. A monster whose reign of terror began when this was the epitome of the American dream. Back in the mid-70s, there were lots of open spaces, jobs, new housing developments, and an almost small-town innocence. An innocence that evaporated with each and every brutal attack he carried out.
It was about 6:30 in the morning. My husband was just leaving for work, and my 3-year-old son came out of his bedroom and got in bed with me to snuggle. Within 2 minutes, I saw a bright light shining down the hall and someone running down the hall. I hardly had time to react when I looked up, and there was a man wearing a ski mask, holding a large butcher knife.
It was 1976, long before America knew of the Golden State Killer. And 30-year-old Jane Carson Sandler was about to become victim number 5 of a serial rapist stalking the eastern suburbs of Sacramento.
He proceeded to tie us both up, our ankles and our wrist, with shoelaces.
He was tying your son up?
Yes, and he gagged us both. And he blindfolded us both. I'm wondering, what is this guy contemplating? And he did it for the longest time. And then, as soon as he untied my ankles, then I knew what he was there for. The fear was so overwhelming. I'll never forget it.
Callously, after sexually assaulting her, the attacker spent more than an hour inside Jane's house, helping himself to what was in her cupboards, and even cooking a meal before finally leaving.
When you found out that you were victim number 5 and that your rapist was a serial offender, did that make any difference to how you felt?
Well, I figured if I was number 5, there's going to be probably a number 6, 7, 8, but I never realized it would be up to 50. I mean, it was crazy.
Why the police can't catch the rapist and worried about their own homes being violated.
I put locks on my doors.
A sex attacker on the loose became the lead story.
The next rape could be anywhere.
In every Sacramento news bulletin. He was quickly branded the East Area Rapist, and each new assault led to ever-increasing fear in thousands of family homes.
And it was like at least once a week, and one night we had 2 rapes in one night, and that really sent us on a spin.
No wonder there was paranoia in the suburbs.
Yes, everybody was afraid.
Carol Day is a force to be reckoned with.
If you are going to defend yourself, you must injure your attacker.
In the 70s, she was one of the lead investigators tracking the movements of the East Area Rapist and counselling 27 of his victims.
It was absolutely an obsession to be able to find out who this rapist was.
He left an extensive trail of destruction, didn't he?
Hardware stores didn't have locks on the shelves anymore. Guns were flying off the shelves as well. Everybody was a suspect. And we got to thinking maybe he has a law enforcement background or maybe he's military. Because of the method of operation, he was a pro at making sure nobody was going to know who he was.
This is the house that I lived in with my mother in 1977 when the attack took place.
And where is your bedroom?
My bedroom was downstairs.
And he could see straight in?
He could see straight in, yeah.
Margaret Wardlow was 13 when she became the East Area Rapist's youngest victim. Ironically, she was obsessed with the case and had read dozens of newspaper stories on the attacks. So when he came for her, Margaret knew exactly what she had to do to survive.
He had an MO, and that was he would place these plates on the back of the husband and tell the husband, if I hear these plates rattle, I'm gonna kill your wife and I'm gonna come back in here and I'm gonna kill you.
And this night he put the plates on your mum's back.
Yes, I heard the plates and I could hear him go into her room, and at that moment it was almost like a calming voice inside of me that says, you know, you're gonna get raped, this is what's gonna happen, but you're gonna survive, you're gonna get through this, it's gonna be okay. All the way through the attack, I was just saying no, and you know.
It's courageous.
He really got off on power and control through fear. The fear in his victims is how he really got pleasure from what I could understand from everything I'd read. And so for me, being able to tell him, I don't care what you do, that was my way of telling him, you mean nothing to me. I'm not afraid of you.
The tally of victims rapidly climbed to almost 30.
And still, nobody even knows what he looks like.
But what was more terrifying, the East Area Rapist's passion for violence had begun to escalate.
We knew he was ready to kill. We were afraid our next phone call was going to be to a homicide scene instead of a rape scene.
And it was.
Yes.
Joseph D'Angelo.
72-year-old Joseph D'Angelo is accused of being one of America's worst serial murderers and rapists. He managed to evade capture for over 40 years, and that's likely because he was a police officer. It was a career that began here in the tiny town of Exeter, California, and where he learnt to hide his criminal perversions.
You thought he was quite smart, did you?
Oh, yeah. He knew everything about everything that needed to be known about law enforcement.
Up until a few months ago, Farrell Ward counted Joseph D'Angelo an old friend. They worked together as police officers in Exeter and socialised on the weekends. Farrell now looks back at the crime scenes they attended together with a very different perspective on his brother-in-arms. D'Angelo had everyone, including his law enforcement colleagues, fooled.
If he'd committed a crime here in Exeter, he would come out and do the follow-up investigation, and there wouldn't be no evidence, because if he turned up any evidence, it'd probably most likely been him.
He could destroy it.
Yes, very easily. Yeah. And no one could have picked it up because he was just that good at what he did. I mean, he was he was free for what, 40 years, 45 years in the FBI, and the very best technology they got out there, they couldn't find the guy, you know.
So maybe you were right. Maybe he was smart after all.
Oh yeah, he was. He was one smart cookie.
So this is the neighborhood where the East Area Rapist started attacking.
But ultimately, not as smart as Detective Paul Holes, who, after more than 2 decades of investigating, finally figured out D'Angelo's lies.
All the houses are single-story. He rarely went into a neighborhood that had 2-story houses. He liked to move around, hop fences, and move through the backyards.
Detective Holes says in the mid-1970s, Joseph D'Angelo moved from Exeter to the suburbs of Sacramento, which then became the rogue cop's new hunting ground.
As far as the law enforcement training, he understood exactly how patrol was going to respond to an attack that had occurred. And so he would park his car at locations so he could, as law enforcement is potentially responding, slip through that and get to his vehicle many blocks away from where the victim's house was to be able to drive.
Joseph D'Angelo used to work here, a police officer by day, and by night, the East Area Rapist. The first 44 rapes and 2 murders were committed while he was a cop here. until he was caught shoplifting a can of dog repellent and a hammer. The police chief sacked him on the spot. And a few weeks later, a prowler turned up at the chief's home outside his daughter's window. He was convinced it was a vengeful D'Angelo. But staggeringly, the police chief never followed it up. It was the one big clue that could have put a stop to all the killing.
Jane, when no one followed up his dismissal from the police force for shoplifting.
Yes, it's crazy.
For rape victim Jane Carson Sandler, that oversight should have been the moment Joseph D'Angelo's secret was uncovered.
That's surprising, isn't it?
Very surprising.
That's probably the biggest miss of the entire investigation.
I
isn't it?
agree. I agree. I agree.
In 1979, the spree of sexual assaults in Sacramento stopped abruptly for no obvious reason. What investigators didn't know was their biggest fear had come true. This sadistic, violent rapist was on the move again and had become even more brazen. When the East Area rapist re-emerged in Southern California, it was as a fully fledged serial killer.
So he starts off as the East Area rapist.
That's correct.
And that name gets changed to the Golden State Killer.
Yes. So you see an offender that over the course of more than a decade, he's moving through the state, and at that point in time, law enforcement is not conclusively connecting the dots that this is the same guy. He is probably the only offender that I know who has had different monikers when it was an unsolved series.
The Golden State Killer murdered 13 people across the state of California. Added to the 50 rapes and various other assaults and kidnappings, he became one of the United States' most hunted fugitives. Every detective in the country wanted to solve the crimes, including Detective Paul Holes, who first got his hands on the case files in 1994.
You started investigating this just as DNA technology was becoming a real thing for law enforcement, didn't you?
That is the reason why I initially decided, well, I need to look at this case because I have this newfangled DNA technology. And I was like, well, let me see what I can do. And since 2001, the Golden State Killer's DNA profile was up in the FBI's CODIS system, which is the FBI's DNA database.
That's a national database.
That's a national database. It's over 16 million profiles in that database. It didn't hit.
Because Joseph D'Angelo had never been convicted of any crime, in trouble with the police on that level. He was not in any database.
He had never been convicted of a crime that qualified him to be compelled to give his DNA to be put into a database.
So how did you find him?
So that's where, as I sat back, just almost feeling defeated about all these years, haven't found this guy, how am I going to get this case to progress? And that's when I learned about this technique using genealogy in DNA.
Paul Holes discovered that family history websites like Ancestry.com and Gedmatch.com can help track down persons of interest. One of their features is that you can enter your own DNA to find long-lost family members. But Holes took it to the next step. Using DNA collected from the Golden State Killer's crime scenes, he uploaded it to see if he could get any matches. It was a brilliant thought. Smart, modern detective work.
Were you doing this, though, on a clandestine level? Did you have to create a false profile?
Yes, so we created an undercover profile and uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile into Gedmatch. Within a day, I had the list of potential relatives to the Golden State Killer out of Gedmatch.
What was your shortlist?
So we ended up with roughly 5 males that had California connections that were of the right age that caused us to have to do a little bit more research on who these individuals were to see if they had any other aspects of them that caused us to, well, we might need to look at them closer as a potential suspect.
That shortlist had the name Joseph James D'Angelo. He fit the profile of the Golden State Killer perfectly. He lived in Sacramento and was the right age to commit the crimes. After secretly watching him for days, police took a used tissue out of his garbage bin and tested it for a definitive DNA match. It came up positive. The fantastic gotcha moment.
There is no question that Joseph DeAngelo is the Golden State Killer. The DNA evidence that we have in this case is conclusive.
Margaret Wardlow and Jane Carson Sandler have waited 40 years to look the man who raped them in the eyes. Today is that day. But looking at the shuffling, frail, elderly man in orange prison overalls, it's hard to picture the Golden State Killer, the monster behind at least 50 rapes and 13 murders.
Seeing him in that orange jumpsuit, it must have given you some pleasure.
Yes, I feel there's closure. I know where he is now. I've taken pictures of this building. I know where he is, and this is, hopefully he'll stay here till the day he dies.
For Paul Holes, it's surreal to know the man he'd spent half his life searching for is now behind bars.
After 24 years of looking for this guy and trying to identify him, to see him, in the interview room, on the computer monitor as I'm watching him just sit there looking dejected, was a reward in and of itself. Going, I gotcha.
42 years after his first sadistic rape, Joseph DeAngelo was finally arrested here at his home, hiding in plain sight among his suburban hunting grounds. A retired father of 3 daughters, he's been married to a local divorce lawyer for all those years. And ironically, despite specialising in the trade and being estranged from him since 1991, she has never divorced Joseph. You see, the law here says communication between spouses is privileged. You can't be forced to testify against your husband or your wife in court. In short, we may never know exactly what she knows.
I have said all through the years, somebody knew who the rapist was.
Former lead investigator Carol Day still can't work out why suspicions about DeAngelo weren't raised earlier.
He had a different ski mask for almost every rape, a different jacket, different shoes. If he threw them away after each use, I have no idea. What did he do with everything he stole? Did he bring them into his house? Did he hide them somewhere?
So if you were a partner or a wife,
right,
you think you would have some sort of inclination that something was going on?
I would think so, but then, if he was out all hours of the night, it would either be divorce time or wondering, what are you up to?
The Golden State Killer case is unprecedented in many ways, but above all, for the way it was solved. Perhaps it's a look into where future police investigation is heading. And that could mean cold cases all over the world could be reopened to make use of the ever-increasing wealth of DNA material stored on genealogy websites.
It's a much more precise tool to be able to allow law enforcement to actually identify this guy that is committing these atrocities. And we're not seeing anything about who you are genetically. We just know, you shared a common ancestor many generations ago with our guy.
At some time, somewhere in a penitentiary here in California, somebody will walk into a jail cell and say, "Sorry, I put you in there, Uncle Joe. I was just looking for some distant relatives in Norway or Italy."
There could be that scenario, absolutely.
As it stands, Joseph DeAngelo will be tried for the 13 murders he is accused of. The 50 rapes fall outside the statute of limitations in California. But for his victims, including Margaret Wardlow, any justice is enough for the cruel man whose identity she thought she'd never know.
What I hope for him is I hope that he lives a long and very healthy life. And he's going to be doing that behind bars with some other characters that they're probably not going to like him very much.
You'd like him to have a long time in that orange jumpsuit.
A long, healthy life, yes. I like the fact that he's not going to be fishing. I like the fact that he's not going to be riding his motorcycle. I think these things are, that's okay with me.
It's further proof of how perverted he is. But the man we now know is the Claremont serial killer used to call himself the bogeyman to people he met online. On Thursday, Bradley Robert Edwards was found guilty of murdering 2 young women in the mid-1990s. The judge at his trial said it was likely he also killed a 3rd woman, but because her body was never found, there wasn't enough evidence for a conviction. Notwithstanding that setback, the verdict ends more than 2 decades of fear in Perth. But before Edwards began his killing spree, he attacked numerous other women. One of them is speaking publicly for the first time tonight and asking a very uncomfortable question. If her case had been investigated more seriously, could Edwards' evil have been stopped much sooner? Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon. 2 beautiful young lives so brutally ended by serial killer Bradley Edwards, who was also charged with the murder of Sarah Spears. And there were other victims, women who somehow survived. Wendy Davis is one. She fought for her life after Edwards attacked her in 1990. Wendy, you're the victim of a serial killer who has lived to tell the tale. How does that sit with you?
Not easily, Liam. But I feel very, very, very blessed and very grateful that I'm actually here to tell the story.
Wendy Davis now lives a world away from Perth, with husband Tim and dog Maisie in a glorious part of Tasmania. Tonight, she's telling her story for the first time. A story of how a killer could have been stopped in his tracks before the murders started. Why have you chosen to speak out now about this, to relive this terrible ordeal?
This hasn't been an easy decision for me to do this. I'm a very private person, but I wanted to have the opportunity to tell my part in this terrible, terrible story in my own words.
And I know this sounds silly in one regard, but you are one of the lucky ones, aren't you?
Oh, yes. Yep. Yep. I was very lucky. I was very lucky.
Today's discovery confirms Perth's worst fears. Another young girl murdered, a serial killer amongst us.
It's impossible to understate the impact Edwards' crimes had on Perth in the 1990s. Targeting young single women in the upmarket suburb of Claremont after they had been on a night out. He would kindly offer them a lift home in his Telstra station wagon before murdering the girls and dumping their bodies in isolated bushland.
Photographic evidence of the shallow grave was taken. Police divers arrived to search the nearby swamp.
There was a monster at large. The equivalent would be, I guess, Ivan Milat driving around, Double Bay or Toorak in a Telstra car, picking up, single young women walking the streets.
I mean, it really changed this area, didn't it? It used to be a bustling place for young people to come to. It completely altered that.
Exactly. It became rigid with fear, this town. You could almost smell the fear when first 1, then 2, then 3 young women went missing.
Brett Christian is the owner and publisher of the local Claremont newspaper, The Post. The abductions and murders happened on his beat. No one has followed this story more forensically over the past 25 years.
You come here during the day and you'd have no idea that this was a place of horror, really. It became that in people's minds.
So these streets here were the hunting ground for the killer. That's That's not putting it too harshly.
Exactly. You know, he was a predator. He prowled the area looking for prey and found it.
Bradley Edwards grew up on the other side of Perth from Claremont in the suburb of Huntingdale. He and his family have long since moved on, but it was from this house a teenage Edwards began his prowling habits. From here, at night time, he became a burglar, a peeping Tom, and on at least one occasion, a sexual offender. In 1988, he was responsible for a string of offences around nearby homes. Police collected fingerprints, even DNA from clothing left behind, but they simply couldn't catch him. Then, 2 years later, he chose a very different location to attack another victim in broad daylight. In 1990, Wendy Davis worked as a senior social worker in the palliative care unit of Hollywood Hospital in the Perth suburb of Nedlands.
I thought I'd found my vocation. I loved my job. We worked with the doctors and the nurses to provide end-of-life care for patients who were dying. Yep.
At the time of the attack, Wendy was a 40-year-old mother of three. And Edwards, a 21-year-old employee of Telecom, now known as Telstra. Around mid-afternoon, May the 7th, 1990, Wendy was at her desk, immersed in her work.
I can remember what I was doing because it was my youngest daughter's 11th birthday, and I was hurrying to get this report done so that I could get home at a reasonable hour. And a voice said, is it okay if I use the toilet?
Is it okay if I use the toilet?
And I was on one of those swivel chairs on wheels, and I turned round and I saw that it was a Telstra worker. He must have had some identification or uniform, and I didn't really look at him. I was vaguely aware of him going behind me to go into the toilet. When I heard the toilet flush, he hadn't been in there long enough to go to the toilet. But just as I was thinking those things, a hand came from behind me with a cloth on it round my face. Another hand came round behind me and grabbed me and hoiked me up back off my chair and started to drag me towards the toilet area and the utility room. And I was absolutely petrified. I thought there was something on the cloth, and I thought I was going to die. I thought the force with which he did it was so frightening. I was so scared. I couldn't breathe. Eventually I had to breathe in because I was starting to choke and the cloth was being pushed further and further into my mouth. So I breathed in and I realised that I was still all right, that there was nothing on the cloth. I thought that, and that's when I really started to struggle. I somehow managed to twist around and I kicked out with my legs. And the next minute, he just stopped, and it all just stopped, and I fell away and I looked at him, and it was the weirdest feeling because he had this strange look in his eye, like he was completely disassociated. And he shook his head and he started to say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Hospital security quickly apprehended Edwards, and along with the gag, police discovered cable ties in his pockets. Wendy is convinced he was planning to sexually assault her.
He was actually going to rape me, to molest me, There was no other reason that he would be dragging me back into the toilet.
It really turned out to be ground zero in this case, didn't it?
It was. Yeah, it's a good description. Ground zero. God knows what would have happened had she not had the strength to kick free. He'd pinned one of her arms, you know, but you really got to give it to her. She really fought for her life. She thought she was going to be killed. And I think it's quite possible she would have been.
He has cable ties on him.
That's right.
And is prepared to use a gag and, as you say, physical force.
Yeah, and he'd scoped out the toilets beforehand, and he was dragging her towards them. So what could have happened to her in there, you know, doesn't bear thinking about.
It's incredible to think that all those years they were hunting this Claremont serial killer, and here you are, unknowingly of course, having a first-hand eyewitness experience with him.
Yeah.
It's chilling, isn't it?
It's terrifying, really, to think that.
A 48-year-old man is behind bars tonight, charged with the murders of Kira Glennon and Jane Rimmer.
The Claremont killer, Bradley Edwards, was arrested in December 2016 after the longest manhunt in Australian criminal history. For Wendy Davis, this news brought back long-suppressed traumatic memories and also anger. She believes Edwards' attack on her in 1990 was never properly dealt with by police. And if it was, it could have saved lives.
I absolutely believe that the fact that Bradley Edwards was not charged with a more significant crime effectively left him off the police radar.
But he would have been on their radar, Wendy, if they had done their job properly in addressing his attack on you.
Yes, that's right.
You were the dress rehearsal for him, weren't you?
Yes, I absolutely believe that he was practicing.
Edwards attacked Wendy while she was working at Hollywood Hospital and attempted to drag her into a nearby bathroom. After the police took your statement and obviously talked to him, what was he charged with?
He was charged with common assault.
Just common assault. Common assault is a charge that could be levelled at somebody swearing at somebody across the street.
Yeah.
Not trying to drag them into a toilet with a rag over their mouth and cable ties in your back pocket.
That's right.
Why wasn't he treated as a sexual offender?
I have absolutely no idea, and I didn't know until it came out at the trial that he'd actually been referred to a sexual offenders program. I didn't know that.
I'd be furious if I was her. I mean, at the very least, it was deprivation of liberty and, you know, potentially a sexual assault. And the extraordinary thing about it was that the magistrate recognised it, and he ordered that Edwards undergo sexual counselling. You know, in fact, he ordered a sexual offenders program for him, which lasted 8 months.
So even the magistrate got it, that it was a sexually motivated attack?
Sure did.
Edwards pleaded guilty, but only received 2 years probation. Author Brett Christian believes this slap on the wrist empowered a young assailant onto a deadly path.
Not treating him as a sex offender at that time, at that instant, what difference did that make to him?
I think his life could have taken a much different path had that crime been treated a lot more seriously at the time.
When Edwards attacked Wendy Davis here at Hollywood Hospital, his family home was still in Huntingdale. That's the same suburb where a string of sex-related assaults and burglaries remained on police file waiting to be solved. But inexplicably, not one police officer investigated any link between Edwards' vicious attack here and unsolved crimes in his own backyard.
Is it melodramatic to say that if he had been treated as a sex offender, the crime had been treated properly in 1990, that Kira and Jane and Sarah could be alive today?
I think it's very possible, yeah. You can't say for sure, but it's likely.
This is a tough question. If police had treated Edwards' attack on you properly, do you think he would have gone on to become a killer?
I've thought about that many times and wondered if I could have done anything else at the time that may have altered the charge. But I did the very best I could, and the police force were not listening, and Telstra, Telecom as it was certainly not listening to what I was saying about the attack at the time.
Wendy maintains Edwards' bosses at Telstra didn't take the attack seriously either. Indeed, a company rep met with Wendy to vouch for his character.
During that meeting where the Telstra manager was actually advocating so strongly for his employee, he actually referred to Bradley Edwards as young Bradley.
Young Bradley.
And that's always stuck in my mind as well. He referred to him as young Bradley. The other thing that he said was he was very stressed, that he was having personal relationship problems, and he just snapped. And when he'd attacked me, he just snapped. And my response to that was, well, it's not normal behaviour for somebody with relationship problems to attack a vulnerable person that they don't even know.
But if they had been listening properly, if they had just done their job properly, and he had been punished appropriately and lost his job accordingly, it may have changed everything.
It may have changed everything, yes.
How in the heck did he get to keep his job at Telstra?
That's a great mystery. I can't fathom it. You imagine someone attacking a client of your employer while you're on the job, and they say, oh, by the way, you just keep your job. And he got a promotion and a pay rise, in the year or so later.
But just carry on.
Just carry on, yeah. No wonder he thought he was bulletproof.
Edwards got off virtually scot-free after his attack on Wendy Davis. It was a critical stage in the making of a monster. To the police, Edwards was a young bloke with a minor assault charge, not a sexual predator on a lethal path.
If the police had just looked a little further into the attack on me, they would have seen that he lived in Huntingdale, where only 18 months or so before there had been a series of attacks where his fingerprints were actually already on record. They would have seen that if they just looked into the attack on me a little bit further.
And it would have changed the course of his life and, dare I say, Kira Glennon, Sarah Spears and Jane Rimmer.
Yes.
When you look at the facts, the cold hard facts, that's exactly the case.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
In less than 10 years, Bradley Edwards morphed from a suburban peeping Tom to a rapist and then a serial killer. Yet, throughout his reign of terror and the decades that followed, until his arrest in 2016, he remained hidden in plain sight. He had a good job, got married a couple of times, played local footy, and was even president of a little athletics club. A regular, civic-minded bloke. But author Brett Christian knows Edwards was anything but.
He liked to call himself the bogeyman.
The bogeyman, yeah.
Does that tell us anything?
That's really, really creepy, isn't it? Yeah, that is creepy. I mean, the bogeyman is what he was.
After attacking Wendy Davis in 1990, the bogeyman didn't strike again for another 5 years. Then, in 1995, Edwards abducted, bound, gagged, and raped a 17-year-old girl multiple times in the Karrakatta Cemetery. The girl had been walking home after a night out in nearby Claremont. She survived, but soon all of Perth would be terrorised.
I can't see any reason why she wouldn't be with us if she could be with us. There must be something more to it.
First, 18-year-old Sarah Spears vanished after a night out in Claremont on Australia Day 1996. Her body was never found.
A mother and her 2 children making the gruesome find.
Then, in August 1996, the remains of 23-year-old Jane Rimmer were discovered 2 months after she went missing.
3.5 hours after the body had been found.
Finally, in April 1997, the body of young lawyer Ciara Glennon, who had travelled back to Perth for her sister's wedding, was found in another bush grave.
Only now do I even begin to understand the terrible trauma that the parents of Jane and Sarah went through. When Ciara was deemed a missing person, I appealed for help to find her in a press conference like this, in this very same room.
It would take 23 excruciating years for Dennis Glennon to finally discover who killed his daughter, and he has nothing but praise for the efforts of WA's police force.
The WA police force deserve a special thank you. They permitted me to enter their world and express my profound desire for justice.
This is an investigation not only spanning decades, but this struck fear into the heart of all West Australians. We knew we were hunting a serial killer.
Chris Dawson is WA's police commissioner, proud that his force finally delivered.
From a policing perspective, from your side of the fence, what was the pressure like to find this bloke?
We've never had a case like it, and one would hope that we will never have to endure anything of that scale. It's a staggering number of suspects and persons that were identified. We went through 18,000 nominated people and or suspects that police developed themselves. And ironically, well, it's more than ironic, Bradley Edwards was never nominated.
He was never one of those 18,000 on the list?
No, he was not.
Never came up?
No.
But the fact that Edwards evaded capture for so long raises questions not about police effort, but execution.
This bloke, from 1988, for 10 years that we know, was attacking, assaulting, raping and murdering for 10 years. And yet he was never even a suspect. How is that possible, and how is that anywhere near good police work?
Because you're being very selective. Not every offence gets solved.
In 1990, he is a bloke who attacked someone at Hollywood Hospital in a sexually motivated way.
Mm-hmm.
That night of his arrest, he goes home to stay with mum and dad in Huntingdale, where 18 months previously there's this string of unsolved crimes, as you've acknowledged. And yet no policeman on the beat puts 2 and 2 together and at least does a search.
I don't think you appreciate that the systems were simply not as integrated then as they are now. And yet, if I mention that there were 27,000 exhibits, if I've already mentioned there were 18,000 suspects, if I mentioned that there were 3,000 witness statements,
It's true that this was an incredibly complex and demanding case. But it's also true police didn't realise the most vital clues were gathering dust on their evidence shelves. Matching blue polyester fibres, later revealed to be from Telstra work pants, were found in the hair of both Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon. Grey seat fibres from a Commodore station wagon were also found on both girls. And it took 11 years until the fingernail scrapings of Kira Glennon were properly analysed and finally produced the killer's DNA.
And when they did test it, they took the sample to England, and when it was tested, bingo, they got a hit.
That hit linked Kira's killer with the unknown Karrakatta rapist. So they finally had the DNA match, but still no name. 7 years later, in 2016, police discovered another DNA match and also fingerprints left behind in a Huntingdale sexual assault in 1988. And guess who those fingerprints belonged to? It was the hand of the young Telstra worker who attacked Wendy Davis at Hollywood Hospital. Police had their killer, Bradley Edwards.
How momentous was that?
That was probably the critical moment where the investigators then knew that they were on the pathway to the person who ultimately is now found as the Claremont serial killer.
Back in Tasmania, the arrest of Edwards stirred awful memories of the attack and its aftermath for Wendy Davis.
Even now, I feel very, very, very guilty that I didn't make more of a fuss at the time that the attack happened.
Wendy, you can't feel guilty. I mean, you were the victim. That's not fair.
But I do. I did my best, but I felt powerless. I felt as though nobody was listening to what I was saying. I felt as though it was all taken completely out of my hands.
The attack on Wendy Davis in 1990. How can you explain how it was that Edwards was treated so lightly?
Look, I'm well aware that the offence for which Bradley was convicted of was that of assault, indeed, common assault.
Common assault?
Yeah.
How the hell can that happen?
I've looked at that. I was not the investigating officer or the arresting officer. I believe other charges could have been preferred, including depriving her of her liberty, for instance. The manner in which he did that. Had that offence been one of a sexual nature in our systems, I don't have any difficulty in saying it would have escalated it on the radar. Now,
it would have and could have quite possibly changed the course of the entire case. You admit that that was bad policing.
I'm saying that had that offence characterised this person as a sex offender, a motivated sex offender, it may well have then escalated this person. It might be a surprise to you, Liam, that there are 2,000 or 3,000 very perverted offenders who live in the city of Perth.
Last December, Wendy Davis was asked to confront this pervert again. She agreed to fly back to Perth to face a much older Bradley Edwards in court.
I was terrified when I went in, but the way that I dealt with it was not to focus on Bradley Edwards. I just focused completely on the prosecutor and just told my story. It's something that you don't forget. It was so terrifying.
When you looked at his face, Wendy, did it all come back to you then?
Oh, absolutely. Everything came flooding back to me. He just looked exactly the same, just older and you know, fatter, bigger, just larger, but exactly the same. The same hair. It was exactly the same.
I am satisfied, beyond reasonable doubt, that the accused was the killer of Miss Rimmer and Miss Glennon.
3 days ago, Justice Stephen Hall found Wendy's attacker, Bradley Edwards, guilty of murdering Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon, and most likely Sarah Spears. It brings an end to one of the most extraordinary chapters in Australian criminal history.
I think you get some closure, but it's always going to be the same. No one's ever going to bring it back.
For Wendy Davis, justice has been a long time coming, and she is now writing her own book. It's a form of therapy and a way of excising her demons.
The attack on you was really the cornerstone of this whole case. It came right back to that, didn't it? That's how police learnt his identity, because he had to plead guilty to that very superficial charge of common assault against you.
Yes. Yes. That's right.
So Wendy, at least you did play a role in identifying him in the end.
Too late though, Liam. Too late. Very, very, very sad story.
The residents of the tiny South Australian community of Snowtown never suspected a thing. Locked in the disused bank just across the road from the local pub was a terrible secret. 6 barrels full of human remains. When police broke in May 1999, they had finally cracked Australia's worst and most baffling case of serial killing. 10 victims, friends, even family of the accused, killed, it seems, for little more than their pension money and the killer's own ghoulish pleasure. Tonight, a survivor's chilling account of what really happened at Snowtown. Marcus Johnson knew the gang. His son was one of them. His 2 other sons were killed by them, and he believes he was next on the list. For legal reasons, this story is not being broadcast in South Australia. Just off Highway 1 in South Australia's wheat belt is Snowtown. Blink and you miss it. But when 8 bodies were found here in a disused bank vault, rotting in barrels of acid, and another 2 turned up in an Adelaide backyard, Snowtown sees the attention of the world and Australia recoiled in horror.
Sometimes you have some terrible dreams of skeletons, of parts of... I know that what was up there was very horrific.
Marcus Johnson is an insider to the horrors of Snowtown. 2 of his sons were killed, a 3rd was their killer. And Marcus believes he may have been next on the list.
You're the person who survived the Snowtown?
I definitely survived it. I was on the list.
The scale of Snowtown and its impact here in South Australia has been extraordinary. Not only is this the most challenging and complex murder investigation in Australian history, it will also culminate in the biggest trial this country has ever seen. So big that a courtroom has had to be custom built here at Adelaide Supreme Court just to cope. 3 men will stand trial for the murder of 10 people. Mark Hayden, John Bunting and Robert Wagner are accused of torturing and killing their own friends and relatives in order to get at their social security payments. The star witness against them is the 4th member of their group, James Vlasakis. After a marathon 6-month committal hearing, Vlasakis broke down and admitted his part in the 3-year killing spree. He pleaded guilty to 4 of the 10 murders and is expected to turn on his co-accused at the trial.
Snowtown had a level of planning by the perpetrators that I've never seen before in a major Australian crime.
Bond University's Paul Wilson is one of Australia's leading criminologists. He's been intrigued by the Snowtown case because of the way the killers allegedly worked together as a pack.
They organised it cleverly and they carried it out with ruthless efficiency. That to me is what makes this crime unique from other crimes in Australia in recent years.
Marcus Johnson knew them all. His ex-wife, Elizabeth Harvey, left him to live with John Bunting. Marcus kept in contact and through Bunting met Mark Hayden and Robert Wagner. He believes it was Bunting who masterminded the killings, plotting with the others to murder acquaintances, friends, even relatives for their welfare benefits.
They fed off each other and it became a game. Reality went out the door and it just fed into each other from the group. Sometimes they were sitting around a table and they did discuss virtually everyone they knew.
They focused on certain individuals, they captured them, they tortured them, they killed them, they enjoyed killing them. They knew exactly what they were doing.
It seems inexplicable. Mass murder allegedly committed for pension checks worth no more than a couple of $100 a fortnight. 10 victims from the poorest sections of Adelaide's northern suburbs. It began in 1995. One by one, they just disappeared. Often, they weren't even reported missing. But then the killers began to prey closer to home. It's alleged Mark Hayden turned on his own wife, Verna.
I knew that something was wrong on Sunday when Mark came to pick the boys up.
Gary and Sinclair last saw his sister Verna in November 1998, when he offered to babysit her 2 sons for the weekend. He says Verna and Mark's marriage had been rocky, but he never suspected anything was wrong until Mark Hayden returned to collect the boys without his wife.
Verna had never dropped them off and not been there to pick them up. It was the whole situation wasn't right. When they'd gotten home, they were sent straight to bed, and when they asked where their mother was, they were told their mother wasn't there and she wasn't coming back.
Meanwhile, Sylvia Lane was feeling just as concerned about her son Barry, who'd also disappeared.
You can just imagine what he went through when they were trying to strangle him. It would have been terrifying. He would have really gone through a terrifying experience, which he didn't deserve.
Once again, the group had preyed on its own. Barry was the former gay lover of Robert Wagner.
Barry used to even bring him up here, and he used to call me Mum, and he used to call my mother Nan, even went to her bedside when she was dying. And that's really, really hurts me to think that he could do that to my son and her grandson.
To put relatives like Garion and Sylvia off the track, it's claimed the killers went to extraordinary lengths. Some of the victims were forced to record messages from prepared scripts before their deaths. Police allege the killers intended to replay the voices onto answering machines to convince relatives their loved ones were still alive.
The people who committed these crimes knew exactly what they were doing, were in control of their reasoning process, even if their reasoning process was warped. But in my mind at least, these were not people who were, if you like, psychiatrically ill.
Did you ever feel like you were on the hit list?
I do believe that I was on the list. But having a job, they thought it would be far too hard to explain me away if I was to be killed. I was taken off the list.
By May 1999, police, alerted by concerned relatives, were investigating a series of missing person cases, all somehow connected to the same 3 men. Mark Hayden, John Bunting and Robert Wagner were placed under surveillance and found to often travel between Adelaide and Snowtown. Now, a fourth name was to join the group, James Vlasakis.
He was younger when they first met him, and I think he was moulded into the group.
Marcus Johnson knows James Vlasakis very well. He helped raise him. It's a complex family tree. When Marcus married Elizabeth Harvey, she already had two sons to different fathers, James Vlasakis and Troy Yude. Marcus had a son of his own, David, and together they became a family. But in 1994, Elizabeth moved in with John Bunting, and that's when James fell under Bunting's influence.
I find it extremely hard and incomprehensible to my mind to think that Jamie, who had lived with me for so long, could actually kill my son David, my lovely son David, and wonderful Troy.
Vlasakis killed his half-brother Troy Yude by strangling him in a bath. He's admitted to killing 3 others, including his stepbrother David Johnson, who he lured to Snowtown on Mother's Day 1999.
Jamie and David went up to Snowtown together, and the pretext of going up there was for David to buy a cheap computer.
As they travelled this road, Vlasakis took a call on his mobile phone, allegedly from his friends waiting in Snowtown. This is the voice of happiness, Vlasakis said. He then laughed and said, "We're on our way." David Johnson would be the last of the Snowtown victims. On May 20, 1999, the case blew wide open. 2 police officers in search of stolen property broke into the Snowtown bank vault leased by Hayden and Bunting. The stench was overpowering. Along with the bodies, they found a frightening collection of thumb restraints, handcuffs, knives, and even a machine for administering electric shocks. Some of the victims were found with burns to the genitals. Most were dismembered so they would fit in the 6 plastic barrels.
It seems to me when you look at how the victims were killed, the torturing, the killing, the dismembering, show that the people who committed these crimes were not only killing people for money, but also killing them because they enjoyed torture and they enjoyed the power of taking somebody else's life.
Well, I know they tortured him. They cut his fingers, or at least one finger off, to get his PIN number to his card. And they strangled him and then cut off his legs to put him in the barrels.
They had gone into an absolute mad killing spree.
They hadn't finished?
Oh, they would have kept going. There was no finish to this. Their behaviour pattern was going to continue and would have continued unstoppable if it had not have been brought to the head by the police.
Overnight, this farming community of just 500 souls became notorious worldwide, and it didn't take long for some in the town to cash in.
In the first 12 months after the incident happened, we had about 80,000 tourists through the town, repeatedly asking for souvenirs. We want something that shows the bank and what's happened. You've got to go with the flow.
Barry Drew went with the flow. Owner of the Snowtown second-hand shop, he sold a range of ghoulish souvenirs, T-shirts and fridge magnets that played on the bank barrel murders and earned him the wrath of the town. Most of Snowtown's residents would rather the attention just went away. But that's not likely, with Hayden, Wagner and Bunting about to face a marathon trial in Adelaide. James Vlasakis has pleaded guilty and will be sentenced later this year. His stepfather finds himself facing a tragic dilemma. He's been asked to make submissions both for and against his stepson.
It's very, very, very perplexing for me. Should I stand here and screw my face up in hatred at Jamie. I don't seem to have that ability to do that. Yet I do not want him to walk the streets again. And that, because that is justice to David, it is justice to Troy and those other two poor souls. I thought he had capacity to love his family and to think highly of us all. I thought I knew him. I obviously didn't. As a human being, I don't know him. I obviously never did.
It's been one of Australia's most baffling and terrifying unsolved crime sprees, a series of horrific sexual assaults on women and girls in and around Sydney's affluent eastern suburbs. The rampage started in the mid-1980s and lasted 16 years. In that time, the Bondi Beast, as he was called, attacked on at least 31 occasions. Police had few clues, but to their credit, never gave up investigating. Then, a few weeks ago, 37 years on from when he first struck, detectives were able to unmask the monster, Keith Sims. As Nine's Sylvia Jeffries reports, how they did it is truly extraordinary.
A dusty old suitcase holds the memories and markers of Jennifer's life. But buried under a bundle of happy photos and clippings is a document that's haunted the 69-year-old for 35 years. A police report from 1987 about the most terrifying night of her life.
Tons of emotional weight. Yep.
You're a survivor of
I know.
one of the worst sex offenders this country's ever seen.
Yes, I'm fully aware of that, but I don't want that, you know, that's not notoriety. I want us all to be whole again. Very much so.
Like Jennifer, Linda knows what it means to carry that burden.
There are moments when you feel weak, and then there are moments when you feel strong. So I was a victim of this person, but I also was a survivor from the very next day.
She and Jennifer have never met. They live hundreds of kilometres apart. But they have something truly awful in common. They were both attacked by Australia's most prolific sex offender.
He was very clever, very cunning.
And devious enough to get away with his vile crimes.
Effectively was a blitz-style attack and involved violence. There's certainly a knife involved in a number of cases.
Stalking and terrorising women across Sydney's eastern suburbs between 1985 and 2001.
There are so many places to hide. Yeah, it would just be terrifying.
But through extraordinary police work and advances in DNA technology, detectives have finally unmasked a predator. The man behind the balaclava was Keith Sims.
I was working as a community liaison nurse, very sociable, enjoying life, happy, outgoing, colourful, creative.
Jennifer's happy and carefree outlook was stolen from her in the early hours of September 27, 1987. As she slept in her staff accommodation at the Prince of Wales Hospital in the Sydney suburb of Randwick, a stranger broke into her room through a balcony door.
I was woken by a male who said, with a knife to my throat, and he said that he was there to rape me. Don't make a noise because I will hurt you. He was wearing a balaclava. I immediately went into a flight mode, I suppose, to protect myself. And I said, look, there's my uniform hanging up there. I'm going to work. Somebody is coming to pick me up. And you have to be quick and put your knife down.
Did you fear that he would use that knife?
Yes, I did, very much so. He was very aggressive. He actually took the balaclava off and I saw his whole face.
Tell me what happened next after he put the knife down.
Well, he got undressed. And then he had sexual intercourse with me.
How long was he in the room for?
Probably 10 minutes. And he must have been watching me because there was males in every other room.
How did you feel in those 10 minutes?
Oh, just so frightened. Possibly I felt that it wasn't happening. It was a nightmare. I could have grabbed that knife and stabbed him, but that's not me.
As if the attack wasn't bad enough, the aftermath was humiliating.
What happened when he left? Did he say anything?
I love you.
He said, I love you, on the way out. How did that make you feel?
Filthy, dirty, disgusting.
It's perverted.
It is. It's horrible.
He said thank you, which was really disturbing. I think it just demonstrates his level of depravity to say that to somebody.
His creepy goodbyes became a mark of the monster we now know to be Keith Sims. Back in 1994, Linda was 24, in her final year at university and planning to travel the world. Out for the night at the Coogee Bay Hotel, she was unaware of the horror that awaited her.
He had been in the venue where I was.
You had seen him earlier that night?
Earlier that night. He'd approached my sister and tried to talk to her, and she had rejected him politely but firmly. I realised that that was the same person and that he had followed us, stalked us up the street.
Linda remembers it being a beautiful night. As she left the pub, she decided to walk along the coastal track to take in the view. It was a split-second decision and only a 200-metre detour. But that's when he struck.
I saw him out of the corner of my eye. I almost knew instantly what was going to happen because he was creeping along and he had a balaclava on. So I just knew in that instant that I was going to be attacked. I just didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And in that moment, he ran up to me. He put the knife up to my face and he basically said, "You're going to do what I tell you to do." I realised that my only option was to try and survive this attack in whatever way I could.
Because you thought he could kill you?
I did think that.
28 years later, Linda still finds it hard to talk about the attack. It was horrifying.
What happened when it was over?
I was probably more frightened then because I didn't know whether he would allow me to leave or not. He guided me to walk back towards the footpath, and there used to be an old brick wall there, and at that point I was terrified that he would throw me off the cliff to stop me from identifying him later on. That's when I was most scared, so I was clinging onto the wall. He backed off a little then, and he basically said, "You can go now." And so I ran as fast as I could.
As she fled in trauma, she had no idea she was running from a serial rapist.
I wasn't aware how prolific an offender he was. 10 years after the attack, it was only then that I realised the extent of his offending.
The extent of Keith Sims' offending was extraordinary. His attacks opportunistic as he stalked and grabbed women along the iconic Bondi to Coogee coastal track and in parks and cemeteries at any time of the day or night.
He must have just thought he was unstoppable. Did he get more bold as he went on over time? He didn't seem to. He seemed to be brazen from the very first offence.
You got some of the crime scene photos?
And also incredibly cunning. He eluded police for years. Detective Sergeant Shelley Johns and Detective Senior Constable Joshua Reeks were put in charge of this complex and confounding investigation in 2019.
What struck you about this case? What really stood out to you about it? Just the terror that these women must have felt, and I've always said this is a woman's worst nightmare, to wake up in the middle of night and someone standing over the top of you with a knife and a balaclava. It just would have been the most horrific thing that's happened to them.
His reign of terror spread far and wide across the eastern suburbs of Sydney. leaving police at the time baffled and convinced they were hunting several offenders.
I think it made it very difficult, the fact that they occurred in different suburbs and in different police commands, so that they were being initially investigated individually.
It wasn't until 2005 that New South Wales detectives began to comprehend the full scale of this case. They discovered that DNA linked 5 separate attacks to the same male offender. It was an enormous breakthrough. The investigation then expanded to 31 attacks, 12 connected by DNA, a further 19 by MO or modus operandi. How can you absolutely link the DNA cases to the MO cases and give us that total of 31?
The MO is so strikingly similar between the cases where we do have DNA to the ones that we don't. It could not have been another offender that has committed the offences in such an identical manner.
The knife, the balaclavas, the words used, they are strikingly similar to the 12 DNA matched matters.
Linda and Jennifer are 2 of the 12 survivors who've been directly linked by DNA to Keith Sims. After their attacks, police asked them for a forensic sample. Years later, it would provide crucial evidence to solve the case. But back then, it was an uncomfortable, even distressing experience.
I just found certain aspects of it exacerbated the way I was feeling. I was traumatised. I felt sick. I was tired. I hadn't slept all night.
You're almost brushed forensically. That's how you feel, you know, that fingerprints, the works.
Which is very invasive.
Oh, it's extremely invasive.
But their bravery in coming forward and the DNA evidence they provided was the key to this predator being exposed. His crimes have shocked even the most experienced police officers, with victims aged from 55 down to schoolgirls as young as 13.
It's very unusual to have a sex offender that will go across, you know, that prepubescent right through to an older woman.
As we drive through Centennial Park, the scene of several attacks, Detective Superintendent Jane Doherty, commander of the Sex Crime Squad, says she was always motivated by the survivors and their need for justice.
It makes you sick when you think about a 13-year-old in particular.
It's horrendous. You know, that young girl has got a whole life ahead of her, and that, you know, that short period of time is going to impact that whole life. No 2 people share the same DNA, and that's why we've been able to come back to this one person.
The 12 samples that were provided are a perfect match to this man.
That's correct.
What do we know about Keith Sims?
We know that he was a family man. We've been told a loving family man.
So was he living a double life?
It appears so. His family had no idea that he was committing these offences and really were beyond shocked when we had to tell them.
The Waverley Cemetery, perched above the cliffs of Sydney's eastern beaches, is strikingly beautiful and eerie all at once. And it's where Keith Sims stalked and assaulted a woman in one of his many chilling attacks.
1:30 in the morning, a woman was walking through the cemetery and was all of a sudden grabbed from behind by a man with a balaclava and a knife and violently sexually assaulted.
In 2001, his rampage had been going for 16 years. By now, there were more than 30 victims. But police still didn't realise it was all the work of one man. Even the newspaper headlines pointed to several offenders: the Centennial Park rapist, the tracksuit rapist, and the Bondi Beast.
You can just imagine the terror that women were feeling. These are women that were just out and about doing their daily activities.
For the next few years, the case went cold, further frustrating investigators. But then in 2016, they got lucky. Forensic evidence from the attacks led to a familial DNA match.
There was an individual within our law enforcement databases that had similarities in their DNA to the DNA we'd recovered from the crime scenes.
Detective Sergeant Daniel Walker, a forensic expert from New South Wales Police, says this DNA hit was a link to one of Keith Sims' distant relatives.
When we do our familial DNA searches, it's continually searching through new individuals that come onto our databases. And then eventually in 2019, we got another a match, but that was a different form of match. That was a Y-DNA match.
Y-DNA matching has revolutionised policing in New South Wales. It's similar to the methods that were used to unmask America's infamous Golden State Killer. Using the crime scene evidence provided by victims, detectives were then able to start mapping out a sprawling family tree.
Where do you go from there?
We were able to apply Y-DNA testing to some of those individuals who had DNA on our databases, and we were able to really hone that family tree into one single branch which the investigators could focus on.
How many Y-DNA matches did you get across that family tree?
4.
Those 4 Y-DNA pings spread across 4 different branches expanded the family tree out to 324 people. It covered 5 generations, dating back to the 1800s. After ruling out those who had died or weren't in the right age bracket or location, they whittled it down to one branch of 120 family members. This is a huge amount of evidence. Is this what faced you when you took over the case?
It is. My team have spent hours in front of this family tree.
Detective Sergeant Shelley Johns and Detective Senior Constable Joshua Reeks dug up thousands of documents and old police reports as they profiled every family member. Once you've mapped out that tree, what was your role in narrowing this down?
The science took us to a point, and then we just had to do old-fashioned police work. It was figuring out the age range. So we had a pretty wide age range of how old we thought this person was. So you could immediately eliminate someone who was very much older or very much younger.
The meticulous process of elimination took several years, but it left one suspect in their sights, Keith Sims. To prove they were right, they now needed to get his DNA. We can reveal they used a warrant to collect a sample from medical material, and they got a positive match.
Could that have belonged to anyone else?
No, they actually can provide statistical ratio. So it's to a statistical ratio of 1 in 100 billion. So it only belongs to him.
100%?
Yep.
It was a great moment. The case was solved.
The fact that we were going to be able to call these women and tell them that it's the end now. We know who this person is. And I was so proud of our team for being able to get to that position as well.
It was so huge and it was so complex. What was motivating you to keep going in this case?
The thought of all of those victims, those 31 women who had been through this horrific ordeal, we wanted to get them some form of justice or closure at the end of it.
In a frustrating twist, though, detectives were 7 months too late. Keith Sims died of kidney disease in February this year. But Shelley and Josh still had work to do. They had to tell Sims' family he wasn't the man they thought he was.
Who did you tell?
We spoke to his wife. We met with her, explained things to her. Obviously, it was a very difficult conversation for her, and she was in a lot of shock.
They're always horrible conversations to have because his family members are victims as well. They had no idea that he was doing these things, and they knew him as a loving husband and father. And for us to come in and deliver this horrific news, it was very traumatic.
Keith Sims had fooled everyone. His family had thought he was a devoted husband of 44 years, a father of 3 and a grandfather who worked at the local golf club and barracked for the South Sydney Rabbitohs. They had no idea he was capable of something so evil.
Is there anything in his history that could have pointed to this?
Nothing at all.
Last month, police called Jennifer to tell her the news she'd been waiting 35 years to hear.
And he said, "We found him." I burst into tears. It was just so emotional. And I suppose it was the thought that I'd have to appear in court. I didn't have to. Then he said he was dead. I said, "I hope he died with pain." Because he really deserved it.
For the pain he caused you?
Yeah. And all of us.
Like Jennifer, Linda was just as surprised when she received the call.
How does it feel for you to know that there will never be a trial, there will never be a conviction?
I don't look at it like he got away with it, because this is his legacy. He's just a rapist. That is what he is, and that is how he will be remembered.
You've seen the picture now of Keith Sims.
Yes.
You knew right away when you saw it?
Yes, my husband showed it to me and I said, "Take it away, it's him." Straight away.
When you look at this timeline and the number of victims involved, do you wonder how many more there might be out there?
We've always wondered that. All of the statistics say that there would be many more victims. We'd like to have an accurate reflection of the amount of offences this man committed.
It could have been a whole lot worse.
Definitely.
While Detective Superintendent Jane Doherty knows Keith Sims will never attack again, it's not quite case closed for her. She agrees he may have attacked more women than the 31 they know about, and she would like them to contact her.
We need as a community to support victims, not judge them. Come forward to police. We will believe you. We will investigate. We won't force you to go to court. We will walk beside you on the journey that you are prepared to take with us.
I understand how difficult it is for anybody to talk about this kind of offence because you feel so degraded. I'd love to encourage everybody who's been sexually assaulted, women or men, to come forward and report it, because, as in this case, I can see where it leads. But then I can also understand why people are so reluctant to do it.
Jennifer relies on peaceful daily rituals like a walk with her dog Duke to free her mind of the awful memories.
Wait a minute, I'll just wrap it up for you. Do you want the box? Take it home in the box?
Now retired, but working as a volunteer for the Salvos, she hopes this incredible breakthrough makes the other survivors as relieved as she is.
How do you think they might be feeling?
If they're watching this, probably in tears. Yep.
You know what they carry?
Yes. And it's tons of emotional weight. Yep.
But to fully put this horrible ordeal behind her, there is one more thing Jennifer needs to do, and that's get rid of her original police report from 1987.
When was the last time you read it in full?
When I signed it, 35 years ago.
You haven't looked at it since?
No.
It's too hard.
It's too hard.
Can you believe that all these years later, this report, though, has played a big role
I know.
in getting a result?
Yes, I know. Yep. And I firmly believe that the wonderful work of the police has helped to do this. But I'm not going to keep it after this. It's going to be burnt.
You're going to burn it?
Yes, I am. I don't want any more memories of it.
It's the end.
He was a monster.
It's the nature of journalism that we often tell stories that are confronting and unpleasant. Sometimes, though, they're even more shocking than we first thought. Last November, on assignment for 60 Minutes, 9 Sylvia Jeffreys exposed the terrifying case of serial rapist Keith Sims. For decades, the Bondi Beast, as he was known, had gotten away with stalking and attacking women in Sydney. But using sophisticated DNA technology, last year, police were finally able to prove Sims had committed 31 sexual assaults. What Sylvia reveals tonight, however, is that he's likely responsible for many more attacks.
This is the face of a brazen serial rapist, a predator who terrorised women across Sydney's eastern suburbs.
Effectively was a blitz-style attack and involved violence. There's certainly a knife involved in a number of cases.
For decades, Keith Sims led a double life. To his family, he was a doting father and grandfather, a footy fan who worked at the local golf club. To his victims, though, he was a monster.
I was woken by a male who said with a knife to my throat, and he said that he was there to rape me. Don't make a noise because I will hurt you.
Did you fear that he would use that knife?
Yes, I did, very much so. He was very aggressive.
69-year-old Jennifer, a former nurse, is still haunted by the night 35 years ago when a masked man broke into her bedroom and raped her. And as if the sexual assault wasn't bad enough, the aftermath was just as traumatic. What happened when he left? Did he say anything?
I love you.
He said, I love you, on the way out. How did that make you feel?
Filthy, dirty, disgusting.
It's perverted.
It is, it's horrible. And
he said thank you, which was really disturbing. I think it just demonstrates his level of depravity to say that to somebody.
Like Jennifer, Linda remains tormented after being attacked by Sims in 1994.
He ran up to me. He put the knife up to my face and he basically said, "You're going to do what I tell you to do." I realised that my only option was to try and survive this attack in whatever way I could.
Because you thought he could kill you?
I did think that.
Keith Sims' reign of terror lasted between 1985 and 2001. And for most of that time, police had few clues. But thankfully, they never gave up. Eventually, advances in DNA technology, along with some fine detective work, connected Sims to 31 attacks. How can you absolutely link the DNA cases to the MO cases and give us that total of 31?
The MO is so strikingly similar between the cases where we do have DNA to the ones that we don't. It could not have been another offender that has committed the offences in such a identical manner.
The knife, the balaclavas, the words used.
By mid-last year, police were finally able to prove the identity of the man dubbed the Bondi Beast. But then a frustrating twist. They were too late. Keith Sims had died of kidney failure 7 months earlier. But it wasn't case closed. Detective Sergeant Shelley Johns and Senior Constable Joshua Reeks still had to tell his family.
We spoke to his wife. We met with her, explained things to her. Obviously, it was a very difficult conversation for her, and she was in a lot of shock.
They're always horrible conversations to have because his family members are victims as well. They had no idea that he was doing these things, and they knew him as a loving husband and father. And for us to come in and deliver this horrific news, it was very traumatic.
Since our original story in November last year, 20 more women have contacted New South Wales Police saying they were also attacked by Keith Sims. The commander of the Sex Crimes Squad, Detective Superintendent Jane Doherty, welcomes all new information. She says even though Sims has died, it's vitally important to know the full extent of this man's evil.
We need as a community to support victims, not judge them. Come forward to police. We will believe you. We will investigate. We will walk beside you on the journey that you are prepared to take with us.
Hello, I'm Adam Hegarty. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.